IB Nation, welcome to the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It is Wednesday. It is October 18th. We are in the middle of a bye week for Notre Dame. And so this week's midweek rundown is going to be a little bit different than we've seen in past weeks, where we tend to take a look at kind of where, the upcoming opponent and who Notre Dame plays that weekend and all those type of things. And this week we will dive into some sort of overarching look at the program. We'll take a look at the last four games. I'm going to just kind of briefly go over who Notre Dame plays in the last four games. I'm going to talk about some areas that I want to see Notre Dame improve, or not improve, but like what I want to see from the offense and defense in the last four games. That'll be the first part of the show. The second part of the show is I'm going to talk about, has Notre Dame really improved from last year? Are they a better football team than last year? By how much? What areas have they gotten better? What areas are they not better, statistically speaking? And then just kind of overall big picture speaking as they head into the last four games. And I think it's context that really helps evaluate the growth of the program, even though I would imagine most of us agree that we didn't see the jump this year that I'd hoped that we would see from Notre Dame. I really thought Notre Dame would be sitting here at worst 7-1 coming into this bye week. They're 6-2, but there's also been a lot of improvement. So, you got to be able to balance those two things and be able to say, to give honest, objective analysis, you've got to be able to offer criticism when it's warranted, offer praise when it's warranted, but then also to provide proper context and be able to say, hey, look, this isn't as good as I hoped it would be. It's not as good as it should have been, to be completely honest with you, but it is still good and it's still trajecting here. Or, you could say it's not trajecting in a positive way. And that's what we're going to discuss a little bit today. The last topic that I'm going to discuss in today's show is going to be really just diving into some of the big games this weekend. I'll probably take like a little quick 30-second break in between there and kind of prep some stuff for that. But we're gonna dive into some of the bigger games of the week as well. So I'm gonna have a lot of fun. I've already got some mailbag questions starred. We have about 15 questions. I'll definitely be able to do super chats as well that are added. It's going to be harder for me to get new mailbag questions, but if you want to throw them in there, I'll see what I can get to as we go through the show, because it'd be fun to kind of do a mailbag, because you guys are not going to see me live again until Monday. Some of you may like that. I'm going to take some days off. I have not really taken a vacation or really taken real time off since I started the company in 2019. And I'm going to do that this week. It's needed. I got to get some health things figured out. So I hope that you all understand that I'm going to be gone for the next 4 days. I need to rest and just kind of recover as best I can. So I will not do a show on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. If there's any breaking news this weekend, you never know. We may already have a video pre-recorded that will play at that time on the weekend. And so my wife's going to be out of town for a couple days. So it'll be a good chance for me to just kind of relax, get caught up on some house projects and just not talk. My voice has been having some issues with my throat here recently. So I'm going to recover a little bit and then come back on Monday. It's going to be me and Vince doing a mailbag on Monday, and we're going to be ready to rock and roll and start diving into Pitt. So I am fired up about that. We'll still have content at Irish Breakdown. Ryan's going to do his recruiting show on Friday. So we're not going away. Tomorrow night, Sean Stiers will still have IB Nation Sports Talk. So, we're not completely going away. It's just I am going to take a few days off. And so I appreciate all of y'all's understanding. I've had a lot of you text me and say, hey, you need to take some time off. So I'm listening to some of you, the ones that have done that. So be ready to rock and roll. I want to begin just with an overview of what's left for Notre Dame in these last 6 weeks, really, and 4 games, which is kind of wild. I was putting together some stats that I've got some graphs that I'll go over here as we get ready for the show here coming up in a little bit. And you start, man, like there's teams that have played like 6 games, few teams that have played 7. Notre Dame's played 8 so far. And it's very interesting because, I'm seeing all these, midweek All-American lists coming out. I know ESPN had one that they had Joe Walt, second team, but they had Audric Estime and Howard Cross both on the first team. I know Sporting News, my guy Bill Bender came out with one today. He had Joe Walt as a first team guy, Howard Cross as a first team guy, and Audric Estime as a first team guy. So, he had a chance he was actually at the Notre Dame Ohio State game. So, and I'm thinking, man, like mid-season, are we a little late on the mid-season articles? And, because I'm sitting here thinking, Notre Dame's 8 games in, they're 2/3 of the way. And then you think about it and you're like, yeah, most teams are kind of at that midway mark. There's a few teams at 7, but we're kind of barely past that half season mark. So for most teams, so it was pretty interesting. But for Notre Dame, there's 4 games left, and they're going to get a couple chances to rest here. They play a bye week this week, 2 games, a bye week, and then 2 games. And it's interesting because they are kind of through the gauntlet. If you look at the schedule, there's one more really good opponent left on the schedule, and that's Clemson. And we'll see how Clemson is when Notre Dame plays them. Clemson has a very interesting next couple weeks when you look at who they're going to be, because right now Clemson is a 4-2 football team that has not been overly impressive so far this season. And they've got Miami coming up this weekend at Miami. They've got NC State at NC State next weekend. They could be 4-4, and it's not as big of a game. They could be 5-3, and it's an okay game perception-wise. Or they could win their next 2 games, beat Miami, beat NC State, and all of a sudden Clemson's back in the top 25, and Notre Dame will have their 5th-ranked opponent in 6 games. So we'll have a much better feel for what that game is going to be. But overall, the schedule softens up down the stretch. And so, there's times to get right and get back to where you want to be and head into the offseason with some really big momentum. So when you actually look at Notre Dame the second half of the season and you actually add what their schedule looks like, here's kind of where Notre Dame is. And I wanted to put the records there to just give you some context of what Notre Dame has gone through and what they have coming up. So Notre Dame, it's really a wild statistic if you look at this. Notre Dame has played 8 games so far, and they have yet to play a team that as of right now, all 8 of the teams that they've played so far this season either have a 500 record, one team, or a over 500 record. Every single team they've played is 500 or above. And if you look at Notre Dame's opponent record so far in the season, their opponents are 38-14. So Notre Dame has put together a 6-2 schedule, and against a pretty challenging schedule. And they're 34-8. If you take out games against Notre Dame, the opponents on the season are 36-8 against everybody else, not Notre Dame. So I think that doesn't excuse the loss to Louisville. I'm not saying that. We can walk and chew gum at the same time, right? We're all adults here. We can look at it and say, hey, I think Notre Dame should be at least 7-1, right? But then still look at it and say, that's 6-2 they've put together against a really good schedule so far this season. And it's impressive. But then you look at the final 4 games, and it's a completely different storyline. Notre Dame right now only has one opponent on its schedule so far down the stretch that has a winning record. Another team is at 500. That would be Wake Forest. And their final 4 opponents so far this season have an 11-13 record. So it's one of those things where you look at Notre Dame and say, hey, they've beaten the teams that they are supposed to beat. The teams that are like what Notre Dame is playing moving forward, Notre Dame is blown out. So if you look at the record of Pitt, Clemson, Wake Forest, Stanford, far more similar to Central Michigan, NC State, and Navy than they are to Ohio State, Duke, Louisville, and USC. And when Notre Dame has played those type of teams, they've had blowout wins. Obviously, it's been a lot more of a struggle against the better teams on the schedule at times, although Notre Dame did have a huge win this weekend over USC. So you see kind of context of what Notre Dame has coming up down the stretch. Now, that doesn't mean these teams are going to be cakewalks. We have seen not very good Pitt teams give very good Notre Dame teams very hard games. And that's something that we're going to have to, see if Notre Dame is prepared to come out and be mentally ready, locked in, focused, and ready for that football game. And then, of course, Clemson will be a struggle. The Wake Forest game is going to be a really interesting storyline. It'll be senior day for Notre Dame. Sam Hartman plays his former team. And then, of course, Stanford at the end of the year. And Stanford's obviously coming off that big win this past weekend over Colorado, which they were down 29-0. Still just a wild, wild game. You look at what Pitt has the rest of the year. Pitt this weekend plays at Wake Forest, so you're going to see two opponents go 1-1. Somebody's got to win. Somebody's going to catch a loss. If Wake Forest wins, obviously you'll have a second team above 500 on the schedule. Wake Forest, Pitt also has they play. Obviously, they have Notre Dame the next week. Then they're Florida State at home, Syracuse on a neutral field. It appears Boston College at home, and again and at Duke. So the schedule doesn't lighten up very much for Pitt here the second half of the year. Notre Dame's going to have to really be ready for a team that's fighting for survival at that point in time. If Pitt loses to Wake Forest this weekend, for example, they're going to be sitting there at 2-5, which means they can't afford many more losses. If they want to be in the postseason, they're going to be fighting for survival in that game. So that's going to be a battle. Stanford has UCLA coming up this weekend. It's going to be tough. They have Washington at home. It's going to be tough. They play at Washington State, at Oregon State, home against Cal before they play Notre Dame. So, there's a chance that Stanford may only have one or two more wins left on the resume, if that. Although I do think they have a shot to beat Cal. Cal's a team that's been very inconsistent this season so far. At times very good, at times not very good. And we'll see what they're made of, and we'll see what Stanford's made of. Wake Forest obviously plays Pitt this weekend. Then they play Florida State at home. They play at Duke, home against NC State. Then they play Notre Dame, and then at Syracuse. So they have 3 games coming up against Notre Dame opponents. So that's going to obviously be interesting. Interesting look at the schedule. And then, of course, there's Clemson. And Notre Dame is going to have to get ready for that game. As I talked about before, Clemson already they play Miami coming up. Clemson's 4-2. They have lost to Duke and Florida State at home. They were up big on Florida State, blew that lead, lost it late. They blew out Charleston Southern, blew out Florida Atlantic, blew out Syracuse, and then they're coming off of a hard-fought 17-12 win over Wake Forest. After the Notre Dame game, they played Georgia Tech at home, North Carolina at home, and then at South Carolina. So very, very challenging second half of the year for Clemson, and we'll see what that program can do as they finish out the season, including their matchup against Notre Dame. So as we look at Notre Dame at the break, the conversation that you then look at is, okay, you see the schedule, you see what's in front of you. Those need to be 4 wins. We all agree on that. We need to see 4 wins. And I've always said, Marcus Freeman has said it, that when you're talking about Notre Dame and you're breaking down Notre Dame, it really comes down to, Notre Dame needs to play Notre Dame football, right? You need to play your game. You need to do what you do. You need to come out and say, hey, we are a good football team. We are capable of going out there and beating a lot of good teams, and we're capable of going out there and dominating when we're on our game. So then it comes down to, okay, so what do they got to do that more consistently? And that's going to be the focus of the rest of this show, is going to really dive into, who Notre Dame is right now and what I want to see from this football team in the second half of the season as they look to finish strong, because we can all look at I think the Louisville game is the one that still sits in people's craw the most. I know that there's a lot of folks like me that look at the Ohio State game and say, man, missed opportunity. Should have won that game, had a chance to win that game. Didn't. Ohio State made some plays. You didn't. Lost last play of the game. All that's frustrating. But it was still a game where you feel like the team went out and competed and battled and played hard and got after it, and just they're just not there yet. The Louisville game's the one where just the way they played, losing to a team like that, they lost to Pitt the next week, just kind of frustrates you a little bit. And so I think that's where some of the angst and some of the frustration still comes from. But at the same time, this Notre Dame football team, when you look at the last 4 games, is in an opportunity to where if they can win the last 4 games, we may still feel a certain way about the Louisville and Ohio State games, but you're going to look at this team and say, yeah, this team took a step, as we broke down yesterday. And this team got better. But you can also be in a situation where you just beat the last 4 teams just because you're better than they are. You don't necessarily play better. You don't necessarily fix some of the things that aren't there. You don't necessarily make the changes that you want to make to go into the offseason really fired up and say, like, hey, we took some steps. you want to go into the offseason feeling better about where the direction of the offense under Jared Parker and say, because like if you look at the offense, for example, and we'll dive more into it, there's been stretches of the season where the offense has been pretty good, like really good. They were good, not great against USC. And then there was a 3-game stretch where they weren't that good. And so is that who they are, that 3-game stretch? Are they the team that played against USC where they're good but not great? Or are they the team that dominated the first 4 weeks, somewhere in between? I don't know. The last 4 games is going to tell us a lot about that. The defense has been great almost the entire season. I mean, they had a bad half against Louisville when the offense just kept forcing them to go back on the field, back on the field, back on the field. Defense has been great. But now it's about, okay, finish as strong as you started. Continue to make those improvements, because it's important to make those changes and improvements and tweaks and get better, because you can go 4-0 down the stretch, not play great football, not have a ton of momentum going into a potential New Year's Six bowl game against a big opponent, and you're not really rolling as a program. So I think there needs to be some really positivity built within the program, and I'm going to break down what those things are. And then I'm going to dive into just an overall look at where Notre Dame is compared to last season as we kind of evaluate the growth of that program. Just to give you guys a warning and an ask for a request for patience today. My throat is no excuses, play like a champion, right? So I'm showing up today. We're going to rock and roll this podcast, and I think it's going to be a great show. I think you guys are going to like it, but my throat is kind of shot, so I'm going to be taking a lot more frequent tea breaks. I got a lot of tea and honey in here that helps kind of recover the throat a little bit, so I can get rocking and rolling. So I do appreciate your patience when I have to do those things. So when you look at the last 4 games of the year and you talk about where Notre Dame needs to get to, what do we need to see from Notre Dame? I'm going to start with the offense. This is the side of the ball to me that has to make the improvements overall. Like, they have to get a lot better as a unit. They have to become a group of players and a group of coaches that can go out and put together the kind of just they just have to be better. I mean, I don't they just haven't been good the last month. And this is a group that has to go out and get and find its groove back, right? Like some of y'all that are my age, remember that movie with I think it was Angela Bassett, right? How Stella got her groove back, right? Well, Jared Parker needs to get his groove back. Sam Hartman needs to get his groove back. The offensive line needs to get its groove back, right? They got to get back to being what they should be and what I believe they're capable of being. And so there's a few areas that I want to see improvement from this football team in the second half of the season. These are areas where I am going to be looking and evaluating, because there's a lot of people that are just done with Jared Parker. Like, forget it, screw it, fire him. Okay. A lot of those same people wanted to fire Al Golden at this time a year ago, right? Notre Dame was, they had the loss to Stanford, they had the loss to Marshall, they gave up 20 was it 20 points to UNLV, they gave up 24 to Syracuse. I'm done with Al Golden. He needs to go. He's not recruiting. He's not doing this. He's not doing that. He's got to go. Right. And so you look at what the defense has become. It's worked out pretty good. But you started to see signs of that late in the year last year, dominating Clemson, dominating Boston College, played well at times in certain areas against USC, despite being very limited personnel-wise. Played pretty good football against South Carolina after the first quarter. You saw some glimpses of what the defense can be. Can Jared Parker give fans some of that? So the people that I think are more objective about it and saying, look, what we're seeing is not good, but we also saw some really good things. He's in his first year. Let's see what he can do down the stretch. And he needs to get some momentum down this final 4 games to get to build confidence in him, to get the players to make sure that they're completely have faith that he's going to get them rocking and rolling, the coaches and obviously fans. So there's a lot to see, and I'm going to be evaluating Jared Parker these next four games in 6 weeks, and much that we talked about evaluating Coach Freeman last week. It's like, look, you guys have hit some adversity as a program. You've gone through a tough 3-game stretch. You've lost 2 of your last 3 games. I need to know if you, as a young football coach, Marcus Freeman, can push the right buttons to get your team back on track. And boy, did we see him push the right buttons. And they put a video out yesterday, which we won't show because now Notre Dame demonetizes every video that we've ever done. They literally spent this last week going through all the videos we've ever done where we've played like tweets that they put out or videos that they've put out and demonetize us. So we can't show you the video. Although I'd love to. It's a very cool video. If you haven't seen it, check it out. But you just saw Marcus Freeman getting interviewed beforehand, and she asked him about getting the team back on track kind of thing. And he talked about running it back. And he just had this look on his face where he just was like, he just kind of had this like real pissed off look on his face. Not at the questioner, but just, how the week before against Louisville, I just said like everybody's just kind of stoic. They just didn't look like they want to be there. When you saw Marcus Freeman before the Louisville game, my wife has a bunch of pictures of him before the bowl game. It's just, or the Louisville game, everybody's just kind of got this, just, I don't know what it is. It was just that they were just kind of there. But the pictures I have of him and the things that I saw from him before the game, and then the rest of the team, they were pissed. Like they were pissed at what happened to them, that they allowed it to happen, that they didn't answer the challenge, and they wanted to go out and just really get after it. And they did. And so Coach Freeman pushed the right buttons, and you feel way better about going to those last 4 games. Now it's time to look at Coach Parker and say, can he push the right buttons? Can Coach Parker do the things he needs to do to get this offense going, to instill confidence in themselves, as far as from a player standpoint, to do the things to instill confidence in each other, the players in each other, and then to instill confidence in the staff from the players, and then vice versa. Those are things that we're going to learn, and that's what I'm really evaluating Jared Parker on, more than what specific schemes does he run. What's his third down package look like? You guys know me. I'm going to always evaluate that kind of stuff. But I really want to see, can you get this group of players ready to play physical football, aggressive football, urgent football, and also get them to push the right buttons in practice, to structure things in a way that allows you to be a more sound football team. And that's how I'm evaluating Jared Parker. So these are the areas that I want to see improvement. Number 1, O-line consistency. This has probably been the most frustrating part that I have seen from this Notre Dame offense in the last month. How a unit that played as well as it did against Ohio State can look as bad as it did against Duke and Louisville is beyond me. Run game, they were okay against USC. And then pass pro, which had been a mess against Duke and especially Louisville, where Sam Hartman's just constantly getting pressured over and over and over. And I remember doing the preview saying like, this could be the equalizer right here. Like, Notre Dame's got all these advantages against a not very good USC defense. But man, USC ranks 6th nationally in tackles for loss per game. They rank 2nd nationally in sacks per game. They got all these highly ranked guys that everybody loves and talks about. This could be the neutralizer, right? And especially against an offensive line that's just been giving up pressure and pressure and pressure and all those type of things the last 2 weeks. And USC just dominated USC in pass pro, dominated them. No sacks, 1 tackle for loss. According to Pro Football Focus, only 5 hurries the entire game. And just handle their business. And you're like, how is this the same unit from the 2 weeks before? Now, props to Coach Parker or Coach Rudolph to get that unit to play better against USC, and that's great. But it just feeds into the lack of consistency, and that's kind of been an issue the last couple of years. Last year, you understood it. A lot of new guys in new places, new faces, and it was a young group overall. Number of starts wise, you had 2 sophomores at tackle. You're a more veteran team this year. You have more experience coming back at key places, center and left tackle, right tackle. And you just expected it to be a more consistent group, and it just hasn't been. So when I talk about what I'm looking for these last 4 games, it's going to be about consistency up front. I want to see this offensive line play physical football the next 4 games. I don't care who they're playing. I don't care if that other team stinks, if that other team's good. I want to see them play with a mindset and a standard of, we're going to come here We're going to bust you up for 60 minutes. They need to be more consistent with their technique and their assignments. Just consistency of effort, consistency of execution, consistent finish. When this line does that, it's pretty good. I personally would make a change at left guard. I think there's a limitation there, and we've seen about as good as it's going to get. But the fact of the matter is, that's not really my call. And so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that like I have in the past. I'm not going to be able to influence at all. I would start Billy Schrouth moving forward, at the very least, rotate him. But whoever you play, Joe Rudolph needs to show that he can develop a consistent offensive line and an offensive line that plays with the kind of physicality and power that we saw last year's offensive line play with down the stretch. Because if you remember, last year's offensive line had sort of similar issues. Some games they look like world beaters. Other games, not as good. But down the stretch, the offensive line was much better, had most of its best games down the stretch. And it forced teams to say, hey, we've got to load the box against this team. Navy did that. USC did that. USC didn't do that against Notre Dame this past week. And there's a lot of reasons why. Number one is I think you've got to be careful that Sam Hartman's not going to beat you. And the other part is breaking down Notre Dame's film, there's not the same intimidation of the Notre Dame offensive line that they had the year before. And I think that factored into it as well. You need to change that. You need to change that these last 4 games. So consistency of effort, consistency of execution, and consistent finishing are going to be the keys that I'm going to be looking for when I'm evaluating this Notre Dame offense in the final 4 games of the season. Because if that unit can play that way, then it feeds off of everybody else. You want to get the running backs going again, have the offensive line play better. You know, have Sam Hartman doing a better job of staying in the pocket, getting the ball down the field like he did to Chris Tyree, going through his reads, get where he needs to go. Have the line play like that. And if they can do that, then it fuels everything else. And that, to me, is what it means to be an O-line driven team. You dominate the point of attack, and you play at a high level from an effort standpoint, from a physicality standpoint, from an execution standpoint, and then allow your skill players to handle business. If they can do that, this offense is going to finish very, very strong in the last 4 games, even if they don't make some of the other changes that I'm going to talk about. That's how important that part of the game is. Here's the second part. Notre Dame has got to figure out the pass game. It has been such a weird Jekyll and Hyde. I'm going to give you guys some numbers here. First 4 games of the year, the Notre Dame pass offense averaged 304.3 yards per game, 11.4 yards per attempt. Elite numbers. Last 4 games, Notre Dame has passed for 194.3 yards per game, only 6.8 yards per attempt. Well below average numbers. So on the season, you're going to see that Notre Dame has some good numbers. They rank in a good place with some of their pass numbers, and I'm going to show you that and break that down. They're top 25 nationally in several categories, top 15 in several categories when it comes to their pass offense. Overall in the season, they're averaging 249 yards per game. It's a big improvement from last year. But Sam Hartman's a kid that averaged over 300 passing yards per game in the last 2 years. And he's only averaging 229.8 right now, after averaging about almost 300 the first 4 games. They've got to figure it out. So what are some things that I believe they need to do, and some things that could help improve the offense pass game down the stretch? Number one, you've got to figure out who you trust at receiver and play him. Now, the purpose of this conversation is not to tell Notre Dame what to do. You all know what I think they should do. Force feed the ball to number 5, get him going. He brings a different skill set than you have from anywhere else. Get the ball to number 4 more often. That's a big must. And then number 19, get him moving around and get him back into the offense, because he's a big part of this offense too. And then 83 and 17 and 80, those guys can be really good complementary players to those guys. That's what I would do. I highly doubt Notre Dame does that. But whoever you all think is the guys that you trust, whether I agree with it or not, whoever you guys trust, create a more fluid rotation. And what I mean by that is it's right now I view it as like real herky-jerky. It's just from play to play, you're rotating guys out. A guy can go make a catch for 10 yards, and then we don't see him again for 6 plays. It's been impossible for the Notre Dame receivers to get into any kind of rhythm with the way that they rotate guys. It's impossible. Look, I've played the position as a freshman. I started as a true freshman in college at wide receiver for 6 games before I got hurt. I've coached the position. I've coached All-Americans. I've coached on offenses that have set passing records, all-time passing records for the school. I've done this. I'm telling you. I like playing a deep bench, but you can't keep rotating every single play like they're doing right now. It's impossible for guys to get into a rhythm, and it's even harder for guys that don't have a ton of experience. And it's killed the pass game. It's been one of the things that's absolutely killed the pass game in the last 4 games. Is just there's no flow. There's no, I now know what this guy wants to do to me against press. So, because part of winning at press is you've got your stuff that you've got to work on, but then I go against this guy 15, 20, 25 times, and now I know this is how I can beat this guy. And go back, hey, coach, I can beat this guy. But when you only go against him once every 10 plays, it's harder for you to have that. So to me, they've got to find a way, whoever you trust. The whole who I think they should play and who I think they should play, that's a different conversation that is more of a off season, personal preference, opinion, evaluation, whatever kind of thing. What I'm saying is no matter who they like and who they think should be the guys doesn't matter, right? It's just whoever you think it is, whether I agree or not. I could be wrong. They could be wrong. It's not the point. But whoever you're going to play, you've got to have a more consistent rotation. Let guys stay on the field longer. Let them get into the groove. Have a more healthy mix between your top 3 and 4 and your next couple. You've got to do that because they've got to get into the rhythm. It's impossible for Sam Hartman to get into a rhythm with his receivers when he's got a different group of receivers on the field almost every play. Like that is a problem that needs to get addressed like now. That's a great part of what the bye week needs to be about is, look, this is our rotation. This is how we're going to go into it. And if you want to do a thing where, well, in 12 personnel, we want to play these 2 guys and in 11 personnel, then fine. Then stay in 12 personnel for 5 or 6 more plays and mix things up within it. Stay in 11 personnel for a series. They've got to figure those things out because if that's the only improvement that they make, if that's the only thing they do is that right there, you'll see an improvement in the pass game. It won't be like enormous, but you'll see an improvement. It'll become more efficient. Hartman will get more on the same page. He'll be more comfortable and you'll be good to go. Another thing they need to do, and I don't understand at all why they've been hesitant to do this, is more RPOs. I have no clue why they just refuse to do it. None. But they need to get back to more RPOs. Another thing I want to see them do in the pass game is they got to get back to getting the running backs more involved in the pass game. This has been a very interesting sort of kind of revelation that we've seen in the last several games because I really liked how the backs were involved in the first part of the season. If you look at the first 4 games of the season, the running backs had 16 catches and in the second half of the season, the running backs have had 16 catches. So first 4 games, 16 catches, last 4 games, 16 catches. Here's the difference. First 4 games, 191 yards receiving. Second 4 games, 79 yards receiving. It's been nothing but checkdowns. You're struggling at receiver. You have very talented athletes at running back. I think something this staff needs to do is find more ways to get the running backs more involved in the offense. That's going to be a big part of their success is make them more of a threat, more of a weapon in the pass game. So do more things to get Jeremiah Love the football. I'm shocked. Jeremiah Love only has 5 catches on the season for 38 yards. That's it. I just feel like he should be a greater part of the pass game. Jadarian Price has 5 catches for 65 yards, like 40 of it came. That's an area where you can get him the football more. And the guy that's second on the team in catches this year is Jabron Payne, who's got 8 catches for 52 yards. And he had a heck of a catch in the goal line. I was good with that play. That play made a lot of sense. But those are opportunities for you to get Jadarian Price and Jeremiah Love more touches. So that's something I would absolutely like to see them do, is to be more effective in that regard. And it's not just hitting the check downs, but do some swings where you're getting, instead of checking down right up underneath, do some things where you're checking down and you're getting out to the perimeter on some swings, and you can throw the ball out to Love or Price in space. Maybe they get tackled for a 2-yard gain, but if they can make people miss, then you've got some potential for some big plays. So finding ways to get the backs more involved in the pass game with check down, different types of check downs, but also with some design stuff is something that I think could add some value, and not just running wheel routes. Like teams kind of know that's coming now. They're playing it now. You've seen 87 wheel routes. They're prepared for it. So I think there's different things that they need to do to get the backs more involved in the offense. Even just maybe lining them up outside, running now screens. I mean, like honestly, I'd go 21 personnel and I'd put my tight end in like a little wing position, and I'd have my running back outside with one of my receivers, have another receiver backside, run inside zone, and run an RPO screen out there or a bubble screen out there, just something in the back where if they want to come in and play my run game, then I'm pulling that sucker and getting it outside. Maybe you do like an overload, and you could do some different things. Maybe put your two receivers to the right, both of them on the line, tight end in the wing, so he can do different things run game wise. He can go counter. He can do different things. But then you can also have your other running back over here, send him in motion. You can do a jet with him. You can do some screen pass action to him. You can do some put him back motion, read zone, read it, pull and throw the swing. There's a lot of things you can do if you're willing to be creative with it, to where you're saying like, look, right now we don't have a lot of faith in our receivers. And we're not sure what those guys can do. Half the receiving core is struggling with hamstring injuries this season. And so, but we got some really talented backs, and we're going to find some ways to get them rocking and rolling. So that's something I would like to see them do in the pass game as well. And then the final piece to improving the pass game is they just got to get back to being a little bit more aggressive. I'm hoping, and I said this in the show on Monday night, I'm hoping that what we saw from the pass game with the shot to Rico Flores, the shot to Chris Tyree, that's sort of the beginning of getting the vertical passing game back on track. I'm hoping that that's the case, because they're going to have to be more aggressive. Because can you beat the next four teams without being aggressive with your pass game? Yeah, you can. Can you go into a New Year's Six game against an Oklahoma, a Texas, an LSU, an Alabama, and win that way? It'd be a lot harder. I don't know that you can. You've got to get your vertical passing game back on track. And what I don't want to see is just the same old stuff we've seen all year. You're going to have your base plays, but you've got to be willing to try some things and have some wrinkles to try to create some more big play opportunities. And it doesn't always mean throwing down the field. It could mean double moves. It could mean, hey, we looked at our tendencies. We run a million option plays. So against Clemson, who's an aggressive defense, we're going to, run a stick nod with our tight end and maybe catch a big play that way, or with Chris Tyree or something. We'll run pivot routes where you get guys moving and then kind of run a pivot stutter. There's all types of different things that Notre Dame needs to do that they just don't do off of their pat. You run a million meshes. If you're going to run a million meshes, you got to run some pivots off of it. You got to run some double moves off of it. You got to have them climb from time to time. There's just things that you have to do to really make those things effective. And I hope that they're more aggressive. And then the last piece is Notre Dame's got to get a lot better on third down in the last four games. Yeah, this is another statistic that's just been really problematic, and it's been an issue on both sides of the ball. And this is something I'm going to talk about on both sides of the ball. The Notre Dame offense in the first four games against against FBS teams. So I took out Tennessee State. They were like 9 of 11. That skews the stat. That I don't like using that Tennessee State game. But even if you take that out, it still gives you a very good idea of where they were the first four games against FBS teams. So this is through Ohio State. They were converting 46.5 of their third down attempts. They never had fewer than 5. They had 5 against every FBS opponent they had. They had 5 against. They went 5 of 7 against Navy, 5 of 14 against NC State, 5 of 12 against Central Michigan, 5 of 10 against Ohio State, 20 of 43 for 46.5. In the last 3 games, however, they've only had 3 conversions in each game. They went 3 and 15 against Duke, 3 of 13 against Louisville, and only 3 of 10 against USC. Got to get better on third down. Need a better plan. Need a better execution. And it hasn't just been, get better on first, second down and put yourself in more short yardage. They've had a lot of third and short failures during that stretch as well. So third down is going to be a part where the offense is going to have to get a lot better down the stretch. Let's talk about the Notre Dame defense now and what I want to see from the Notre Dame defense kind of down the stretch. And honestly, folks, this is going to be a pretty quick one, to be honest with you. It really comes down to, in a lot of ways, keep doing what you're doing. right? I mean, you're a really good pass defense. Keep doing it. You're a great red zone defense. Keep doing it. You know, you're not giving up a lot of big plays in the pass game. Keep doing it, right? There's a lot of things for the defense to just keep doing it. The other areas, it's not so much that they're not doing well. There's really only one area that I like, two areas where I don't think the defense has been playing well, but they're coming off their best game of the season in one of those areas. And we'll talk about that and just kind of get better. But number one is keep attacking. In Notre Dame right now is ranks in the bottom half of the country when it comes to tackles for loss and sacks per game. They haven't been very good in either area. But if you look at the two games where they really turned the D line loose, like really turned them loose against Duke and USC, where their two highest games, of the two best games of the season from a standpoint of tackles for loss and sacks. They had 6 tackles for loss against Duke, and they had 11 tackles for loss against USC. They tied a season high with 2 sacks against Duke. It's not great, but they had a lot of pressures, but then they had 6 sacks against USC. So to me, turn the defensive line loose, keep attacking, let them go. It's going to result in more disruptives. It's going to result in more tackles for loss. It's going to result in more sacks. It's going to result in more third and longs, which then leads to more turnovers. It's another area where I want to see Notre Dame just build on that USC game. That's actually my third key, and I just bring it in now, is if you're more disruptive up front and you're more dominant up front and really turning that group loose and not relying on your linebackers to make all of your production, which they didn't do against Duke and they didn't do against USC. Number one, it makes your linebackers better, as we saw against USC. But as I said, it's going to make you better on third down, which we talk about. It's going to allow you to force more turnovers, which we'll talk about. And it's just going to allow you to be more dominant, just really, really, really bury teams. And if they can do that, I think this defense will have a shot to finish as one of the best we've seen at Notre Dame in quite some time. Because if you think about, like, I'm going to pull that schedule back up again. Like, let's pull that back up again. Because I want to, I'm going to, well, actually, you know what? I'm going to wait until we talk about, no, let's do it now. Let's do it now because I really want you guys to understand just how excellent this has been. I'm impressed by what we've seen. So let's pull this part back up. This is the schedule that Notre Dame has faced so far. As I said, 38-14. 38-14 is the schedule they've played so far. If you take the Notre Dame games out, 36-8. Notre Dame has a defense that, as I'll show, is a top 10 to 15 defense in a lot of categories. And they're doing it against a very challenging schedule. And I've been incredibly impressed. You're not playing those type of teams down the stretch. You're just not. If you look at your I'll give you some context, for example. Well, I'm going to hold off on that for the next section because it'll speak to the improvement. But you've played some pretty good offenses this season, and you're going to play offenses down the stretch that, simply put, just aren't that good. I mean, let's just we can be honest here, right? Pitt's only scoring 25.8 points a game, and part of that's because they've had some defensive touchdowns. They won 38-21 this past week against Louisville. It was one of their better performances of the season, but they needed a pick six to kind of get to that point in time. I mean, Pitt's offense against Louisville this past weekend only had 288 yards. It was about turnovers. That's really what it boiled down to. They forced 3 turnovers of Louisville at short fields. Their offense wasn't great. It's not a very good offense. Clemson this year is only scoring 32.2 points per game. But if you look at it, and that 32.2 is very misleading because they scored 66 against Charleston Southern, who's a not very good FCS team. If you look at their other games and just look at the games against FBS teams, they're only scoring 25.4 points per game. Scored 7 against Duke, 48 against Florida Atlantic. Again, another team who's not very good. Florida Atlantic is a 3-3 team that lost to Ohio and Illinois. They're not very good. One of their wins is over Monmouth. They scored 24 points in a loss to Florida State, 31 points in a win over Syracuse, including they either had a defensive touchdown or they had a play that the defense set them up for a short score, and they only scored 17 points on Wake Forest. They're not a very good offense. Wake Forest this year without Sam Hartman, 3-3. They're only averaging 23.5 points per game. They only scored over 30 twice. The first 2 games of the year, they scored 37 on Elon, 36 on Vanderbilt. In the next 4 games since, they've scored 27, 16, 12, and 13 points. Not a very good offense. And then against Stanford, they're only averaging 23.7 points per game. So if this defense stays locked in and just do what you do, don't look at the schedule, don't look at the stats that I just said, stay locked in, focus on playing your best football, be aggressive, turn your front loose, they're going to put up some crazy numbers in these last 4 games, which is going to allow them to rank very high. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. I really am. I think this unit, as I said, has a chance to be very good. It's just about getting better in a couple key areas. Keep doing what you're doing in some areas, but then getting better in a couple areas. The areas those are continue to tackle better, like the USC game, great tackling. Build on the USC game from a turnover standpoint, force more turnovers. That's an important piece. I want to see more forced turnovers. And then be better on third down. That's been the one area where they've just been not very good at all this year. And they've had to rely on their red zone defense of being elite to protect them on third down. If you look at it, Notre Dame this season on defense has allowed opponents to convert. Let me find the number here real quick because I was shocked. I knew it wasn't good, but they're allowing 39% of their third downs in the season. But that's partly because in the first part of the season, they were first 4 games, not including NC State or Tennessee State, opponents only went 15 of 46 on third down. That's 32.6%. If you look at what that would rank nationally, that's a pretty good third down defense. That would rank them about 25th on the season. But if you look at the last 4 games, Ohio State went 10 of 17. Duke went 6 of 15. NC State or Louisville went 5 of 13. USC went 6 of 13. Opponents have gone 27 of 58 on third down, 46.6% the last 4 games. That's got to get better. That's one area that's got to get a lot better. And I think it can, because again, you're not playing teams that are great third down offenses in the second half of the season. If you look at the rankings, Pitt is 104th, Clemson is 27th. They're good. Wake Forest is 81st, and Stanford ranks, helps to spell it correctly, 38th on third down. So you're not playing a lot of great third down defenses. You're playing one top 30, and then Stanford's success is kind of bolstered by playing some bad defenses. They went 50% on Louisville or on Hawaii. Hawaii has a really bad defense. Hawaii's given up 35.6 points per game. Hawaii's red zone or third down defense ranks 113th. Colorado's red zone or third down defense ranks 112th. Stanford went 10 of 18 against Colorado. And then they played an FCS team, Sacramento State, and went 7 of 14 against Sacramento State. So they haven't played a whole lot of good third down offenses this season. Arizona, they had a good success against Arizona. They ranked 7 of 6. They went 7 of 16, which is a decent number. Arizona ranked 66 on third down. So you've got to get better there, and if you can do that, this defense is just going to become just truly elite. Right now, it's really, really good. That's elite at times. If they can clean up a couple of those areas, it become truly elite. And I'm looking forward to seeing them do that as we get down to the last part of the season. So those are the areas that I want to see Notre Dame improve. I would like to see people talk about, play more young guys. There are a couple positions where I think you could maybe enhance your rotation a little bit. But honestly, when you look at the way the schedule is going to be, there's some games where the young guys should just be getting a lot of playing time just because, right? I mean, if you're blowing some of these teams out at halftime, how much of Howard Cross do we need to see? How much of Cam Hart do we need to see? Don't take a chance of getting those guys banged up and get those guys hurt. Get Christian Gray in there, get Jaden Mickey in there. But this is still an all hands on deck situation where you're trying to win games. I had some of the message board ask a fair question. Is this the time to start getting Kenny Minchie and Steve Angeli ready to see who's going to be the guy next year? And my answer was no. You do that in practice. right? You do that in practice, and you do that at the end of, when you're blowing teams out. Maybe you get Sam Hartman out a series early and let, you know, Kenny or Steve get a series with the ones like I did early in the year. Okay, that's different, but that's once you've already started to blow a team out. Priority number one is you've got to win the next 4 games, and you've got to win them the way you're capable of. That's the key. And if that means you can do that and get a few guys in the game, great. I'm all for it. But the key is you've got to win the game. All right, second half of the show today, or second part of the show, not half, because we got some more going on. Second part of the show today is going to talk about how Notre Dame has improved as a football team since last year. Obviously, the record is improved. Through 8 games last year, you were 5-3. Okay, so you're 1 game better than where you were a season ago. The schedule you played last year was a little bit more hit or miss. Ohio State, Marshall, North Carolina were pretty good. Stanford was not. UNLV was not. Cal was not. BYU was kind of middle of the road. So you played a good schedule last year, but not a great schedule. You should have. And the funny thing is, the team that they lost to in that one of the teams they lost to during that 5-3 stretch, the last loss they had in that was to the worst team they played in those first 8 games. Schedule has certainly ramped up quite a bit as Notre Dame looks at what they've done this year. So that's part of it. So the 6-2 compared to 5-3, it's a 1 game improvement, but it's been against a better schedule. You know what I should have done is I should have looked at where opponents were at the same time and seen kind of what the schedule was. I may do that, put that on the message board, and because I'm going to write an article about this week, and I'll put it I'll put that into the article, so we'll have a little bit more context. But the second half of the schedule, or the last 4 games, is not as challenging as it was last year, in my opinion. And I think that could be debated. The top 2 teams were better. You had Clemson and USC, but or excuse me, second half of the schedule last year is better than this year. Excuse me, and I, you could debate that. The top 2 teams to me last year, you had Clemson was a top 10 team, USC was a top 10 team. They're not ranked this year. The second best team you're going to play the second half of the year right now is probably Wake, who's 3-3, maybe even Stanford, who's 2-4. And last year the only real bad team you played was Boston College. Navy wasn't that good either. I guess I should play a couple, but I mean this year you're playing 3 teams that are probably going to have a losing record when you play them second half of the year. So I don't think the schedule is going to be as good second half of the year. So that should lead to more improvement. But I think overall this team has played a tougher schedule this season, and they've improved in a lot of ways. And so I think this discussion is going to be kind of interesting to put some context over what we're seeing. And so that's what I want to do. And we're going to start with the offense, because I think this is the side of the ball that is going to spark the most debate, to be honest with you. So when you compare this year's offense to last year's offense, and so in the graph on the left, and there's 2, so I'm gonna go down to different parts of this. So this part's gonna look at total scoring, total yards, rushing, big plays, turnovers. Second part's going to focus on pass game, red zone, and third down. So there's 2 different graphs for each part of the breakdown. So when you look at where Notre Dame is this year through 8 games compared to 13 games last year. So the numbers on the right are going to be season-long totals. This year, Notre Dame is averaging 33.3 points per game offensively. So the asterisk by those 2 numbers at the top means this. That's where Notre Dame finished the season ranked in scoring offense, but the number to the left is actually what the offense scored. And so this year, Notre Dame is about 3 points ahead of where it was last year. If you remember correctly, a lot of that scoring average came late in the year in the final games. So in the last 4 games of the year last year, Notre Dame scored 35, 44, and 27 points, which helped up their scoring average. And they had 3 games in the first 8 games where they scored over 40 points a game. It was against Syracuse, UNLV, and North Carolina. Notre Dame has already topped that. They've got 5. So you're seeing more improvement. Their scoring average took a jump. And if you count the bowl game, Notre Dame in the last 5 games of the year, let me actually do this data. And the reason this is matters is because Notre Dame hasn't got to that point yet. And the schedule is going to be even weaker, where Notre Dame faced a really tough first half of the schedule. But if you look at last year and you look at where Notre Dame's numbers were last year in the final 5 games, including the bowl game, they averaged 37.2 points per game offensively. Actually, let's do it this way. So they had, let's see, 21 plus 35 plus 30, 44 plus 27 plus 45. The last 5 games, actual offensive points, they scored 34.4 because they had a couple defensive touchdowns in there. And this year, they haven't got to that stretch of the game. So if you look at the course of the season, they were 30.2. This year, they're 33.3. That also includes with the new clock rules. That also has to be taken into account. Yards per game, Notre Dame is only up about 18.3 yards per game on the season, but there's a big jump in yards per play. That's the one that you need to look at and say, look, that's where we've seen the biggest jump is yards per play. Right now, Notre Dame 6.8 yards per play. If they finish with that over the course of the season, would be their best mark since I believe they were 5.2 last year, 5.3 in 2021, 5.6 in 2020, which was a playoff team. I'm sorry, I was looking at the wrong number. They were 5.9 last year, 6.1 in 2021, 6.2 in 2020, which was a playoff team, 6.3 in 19, 6 flat in 18, which was a playoff team, 6.4 in 17, 6.1 in 16, 7.0 in 2015, which was the best. So right now, that 6.8 mark is the second highest, going all the way back to 2010. You could even go back to 2009. That's the farther these stats will go back. The highest yards per play season they've had prior to this year was 7 with the 15 team. The next highest, I believe, is 6.39, which I believe they've done a couple times. So 6.39 in 2009 with Jimmy Clausen, Michael Floyd, Golden Tate. 6.39 in 2017, which was that great ground attack that was excellent. Those are the two. 6.30 in 2019. So they're well ahead. They're over a half yard better than any other season they've had. And that's without even getting to the soft part of the schedule. I mean, that has to be taken into consideration, because when you look at what Notre Dame is going to face in the second half of the schedule, Clemson has a very good defense. Very good defense. Clemson's defense right now rivals Notre Dame statistically in a lot of ways. They're giving up 19 points a game. They've had a couple offenses giving up a couple touchdowns. Pitt's giving up 25 points a game. Wake Forest is giving up 23 points a game, and Stanford's giving up 36 points a game. And then when you look at some of the numbers of those teams that are giving like 25, 23, Pitt held Wofford to 7. So if you just look at what they've done with FBS, actually, you know what? I can pull that up here real quick. Let me go to scoring offenses versus FBS only. So Pitt, actually be scoring defenses, excuse me. Let's go to scoring defenses. This is really a great website, by the way, versus FBS teams. So Pitt has given up 28.8 points against FBS opponents, ranked 79th. Wake Forest is giving up 24.2 points per game against FBS opponents. That ranks them 48th. Clemson is giving up 19.8 points per game against FBS opponents, and Stanford is giving up 37.2. So you're talking about an offense that has a chance to get right in the second half of the year. So when you look at these numbers, for example, and you compare where they are, I'm pulling up the total offensive numbers as well, or total defensive numbers as well, and going to give that. But we're talking about yards per play. And if you look at just per game, Pitt so far this season has given up 5 per game. Clemson's given up 4.5, which is pretty good. Wake Forest is giving up 6.0, and Stanford is giving up, which ranks them, that would rank Wake Forest 84th, and then Stanford is giving up 6.7. So there's a chance for them to make an even bigger jump. They're almost a full yard ahead of where they were a year ago. Run game numbers are down overall. They don't rank 332nd in yards per rush. That's obviously a mistake on my part that I did not catch, which I apologize. But Notre Dame's yards per rush attempt this year ranks 32nd. So there's an extra 3 there, which is up from last year. So even though they're allowing fewer tackles for loss per game this season than they did a year ago, so even though their rushing totals are down, they're down about 24, a little under 24 yards per game. They are up almost a half a yard in yards per play in the run game, which factors in. They've been more of a big play offense this year. Notre Dame, and if you look at this too, these are raw numbers. Notre Dame is on pace to be ahead of that. So right now, Notre Dame has only 20 plays of over 30 yards or more compared to 25 last year. That 25 is over the course of 13 games. Right now, Notre Dame is on pace for 33 big plays, so plays of 30 yards or more. Last year in the past game, they had 21 over the course of the whole season. This season, let's see here, 14 divided by 8 times 13. This year, they're on pace for 23, so slight jump in pass game. And then the run game this season, they are on pace for, if they play 13 games, they're on pace for 18 carries of 20 yards or more. So it's about where they were last year, with most teams playing fewer games, and they're turning the ball over at a lower rate this season than they were last year. So when you look at Notre Dame's production on offense, it is improved. Is this improved as much as we would have liked? No, it's not. Let's see what it looks like at the end of the year, though. And that's kind of my point, is they hit a stretch in the last 3 games where the offense, or 3 of the last 4 games, where the offense simply just did not play well. They didn't. We can all admit that. They did that against a schedule that had the 3rd ranked scoring defense in the country, the 4th ranked scoring defense in the country, and the 38th best scoring defense in the country. They did that against a schedule that has the 7th best team in the country in fewest yards per game, the 16th best team in the country in fewest yards per game, and the 22nd best team in the country in fewest yards per game. They didn't step up the way they needed to in those games. We can say that, but still look at it and say they're quite a bit better than they were in last year. And then you're going to see it really stand out in here in this area. So come on, go back over there. Let's go to the offense. So when you look at passing yards per game, they're 49th compared to 98th last year. Big jump. 21st in yards per attempt compared to 37th last year. 24th in yards per completion compared to 41st last year. They've jumped up from 52nd to 34th in completion percentage. They are 6th in touchdown passes, 13th in fewest interceptions compared to 40th and 77th a year ago. They went from 32nd in passer rating last year to 14th this year. That's a big jump. Their red zone offense overall has gotten better. Statistically, it's gotten better. Ranking from a red zone touchdown standpoint, it's the same, but the overall red zone numbers are down. That's going to be an interesting statistic to measure at the end of the year too, because you got to think about something. Notre Dame has been through the hard part of their schedule. Most teams have not. Notre Dame is one of the few teams in college football that is getting ready to go through a period of their schedule that is the softest they're going to play all year overall. Now, Clemson is very good, but a lot of other teams are going to be, Michigan's got to play Penn State, Maryland, Ohio State. Penn State's got to play Michigan and Ohio State. Ohio State still has tough games in their schedule. Most teams are getting to the part of the season where their schedule really ramps up. Look at the Pac-12 teams and what they have to face this last month and a half of the season. Most teams are facing the toughest part of their schedule. Notre Dame has already been through that. And this is where they rank in these areas. And so, obviously we talked in the previous section about getting right in some of these areas, but the baseline numbers are pretty good overall. Now it's about getting back on track and keeping those numbers there, moving those numbers up in some other areas. And the area where I could see a big change is red zone, because not that Notre Dame will necessarily be better, but as the schedule improves for other teams, that's going to come down. So that 74.1, even if they stay there, could climb up the rankings quite a bit. The biggest difference on between this year's offense and last year's, they're allowing fewer sacks and some of those things is most statistics are either close or the 2023 offense has been much better in a lot of areas. And I think it's going to be even better as we get out of the end of the season when they play some of the lower effectiveness, worst teams in the schedule. Let's just say it that way. But third down offense is significantly worse. Notre Dame ranked 13th last year in red and third down offense. The 2020 offense ranked 7th on third down. Last year, I think they were in the 40s or 58th, I guess. Or no, 2021 they were in the 40s. Let me go third down offense. I think they were in the 40s in 2021. That was the worst year under Tommy Rees. So 2021, Notre Dame ranked 46th. Yeah. But the other 2 years, they were 17th and 13th. Right now, they're 58th. That's got to get a lot better. That's the one area that I would say I've been most disappointed in with the Notre Dame offense as far as where they've taken a big step back from last year. But in every other area, you look at the rankings, you look at the raw numbers, they're making they've made big improvements compared to last year in almost every area. And a lot of these numbers are going to only get better as they play schedules that they're just not as good. We can say it. They're just not as good. So they're going to have to get better in those areas. But I'm very curious to see how it's going to be because we can say, hey, I expected more from the offense. I expect more from the offense, but still be able to look at and say, but they've definitely gotten better. Now, how much better? And that's why I said earlier, I'm really looking forward to seeing what Jared Parker does these last 4 games. Because if he can make the jump, I believe he's capable of, or I believe this offense is capable of, is probably a better way of saying it, then I think this team is going to have a chance to finish very strong. And I'm looking forward to seeing it. Let's move over to the Notre Dame defense and show this. I've said we've talked. I was very critical of Al Golden last year, and even still, I'll admit, like if I was a head coach, what he does is not necessarily what I would want. But there's different ways to be successful. And last year, Notre Dame's defense was solid, at times very good, at times not. But overall, it was a solid year. It was a good year on defense. You brought uh, you brought a lot of guys back. You expect to make a big change. Second year of the defense, how much better are you going to get? And as you all can see, it's gotten a lot better. A lot better. So when you look at this Notre Dame football team and you look at what they've done so far on defense, keep in mind that this season they've played the number 2, number 21, and number 33 scoring offenses in the country. That's an impressive number. Last year, when you look at when you look at Notre Dame's schedule last year, they played 4 teams that ranked in the top 40 in scoring defense. They only played 5 teams all year that ranked in the top 60 in scoring defense. See, 7 of their 13 opponents last year ranked 80. Actually, let's do it this way. 8 of their 13 opponents ranked 79th or lower in scoring defense. This year, and through 8 games, they've only played 3. Or scoring offense. They've only played 3. Actually, no, that's a scoring defense. Scoring offense this season, they've played 2, 21, 33. Last year, they had 7 opponents that ranked 70th or lower in scoring defense. So that's over half the schedule. This year, only 3 of their 8 opponents have ranked lower than 51st. They have 4 teams that rank so far that rank in the top 60 in scoring scoring offense. Last year, they played 6. So far this year, they have played a higher schedule. And if you look at what Notre Dame has done to teams, this is even further context. They held. So I looked at what the team's points per game totals would be if they took Notre Dame out of it, and then how far did Notre Dame hold those teams below their scoring average of what they've done against everybody else. Against Louisville's only 1.1 points. NC State was 1.6 points, although, again, I put a little asterisk on that one because they scored a touchdown late in that game on Notre Dame's backup defense. Central Michigan, 6.3 points per game, lower than their season average. This is where it gets good. Duke, 20.6 points below their scoring average. Navy, 20.8 points below their season scoring average. Ohio State, 22.8 points below their season scoring average. And USC, they held 31.8 points below their season scoring average. So when you think about that number, that context right there should tell you this has been a really, really impressive defense. When you're holding four of your seven opponent or eight opponents, half of your opponents, to 20 points or more below their season scoring average, when the two best offenses you played all year, the Ohio State, who ranks 21st, USC ranks second now, they were first. You held those two teams 22.8 and 31.8 points below their season scoring average. You've got a darn good defense. A darn good defense. Let's dive more into the numbers. Yards per game, they've had a big jump. They're down about 18, so 47 yards below where they were last year, almost a full yard below where they are yards per play. Rushing numbers are about the same overall, but the ranking is a lot lower. Yards per play is a little bit lower. Tackles for loss per game is not as good. So Notre Dame's run defense has not made the jump that I hoped that it would make. That's the one area that I have not seen kind of the big jump that some other teams have faced, right? Or that they, excuse me, I have not seen the jump that I'd hoped, especially based on the teams that they've played. So that's been a little bit disappointing. And it started off well, but it hasn't been as good in recent games. That's something that you hope they can kind of get better at. And again, when you think about it, as I said before, you've got to look at it from the context of what they've played so far. Where last year Notre Dame played, again, we're looking at the entirety of the schedule and what they've done. Now you look at who they have coming up, and they've got a chance to get this number a lot better. Pitt right now ranks 115th in the country in rushing yards per game. Stanford right now ranks 79th in the country in rushing yards per game. And then Wake Forest right now ranks 85th in rushing yards per game. The only team they play that right now is a really strong rushing team is Clemson, and they rank 31st. And so, they have a chance to make a big jump in that area. And then Clemson's production was helped by the fact that they ran for 274 yards and 6.5 yards per carry against Charleston Southern. In their last four games, they've gone for 126, 146, 163, and 207. And their best yards per carry average was 4.94. So even though their running game is better, it's not a great running attack. And so this is an opportunity for Notre Dame to go out and do what they need to do and get that number down. That's going to be a big part of it. It's something I want to see. Now, I didn't talk about in my breakdown, like, hey, get better at stopping the run, because I believe that stopping the run is a byproduct of other things, tackling well, being disruptive with your front. That's why I pointed out in that breakdown earlier that the two games that I really felt that Notre Dame turned their defense loose, and especially their front four, the games where I really felt like they turned that group loose, are the two best games they've had in the season from a disruption standpoint. When you look at Pitt rushed for 217 yards in the opener. Last five games, that was against an FBS or an FCS team, Wofford. Now, next five games, 83, 130, 113, 38 against Virginia Tech, 88. They've only had 4 rushing touchdowns the last 5 games. I already talked about Clemson. Wake Forest this season rushing the football. They ran for 288 against Vanderbilt, 224 against Georgia Tech, 98 against Elon, 97 against Ole Miss or Old Dominion, 102 against Clemson, 35 against Virginia Tech. And by the way, how about Virginia Tech's defense? That is the most schizophrenic rush defense I've seen all year. They've given up 201, 179, 256, 214, and 282 this year in rushing yards to Old Dominion, Purdue, Rutgers, Marshall, and Florida State. Then against Pitt and Wake Forest, they give up 38 and 35. Very schizophrenic rush defense, which is odd. And then, Stanford's rush offense has had a very good performance against USC. Went for 209, went for 180 against Sac State. In their other games, 150 against Hawaii. Their last 3 games, 108 against Arizona, 89 against Oregon, 124 against Colorado. So these are teams that are not very good at stopping the run, which should give Notre Dame a chance to get that number down. But even then, it's still improved in at least one area or 2 areas. Fewer yards per game, fewer yards per play. that's at least improvement, just moderate improvement. Look at the big plays. They're obviously a much better defense this year at limiting big plays. They were pretty good at that last year. Context wise, again, they've played more games this year, which factors into what it's going to be. Just to give you some context, last year Notre Dame had, as you can see there, had 20 plays of 13 yards or more. This year they are on pace for 16, so that's an improvement. Look at the pass plays. Last year they gave up 14 on the season of 30 yards or more. This year they're on pace for 8. Last season, Notre Dame, they gave up 15 rushing plays of 20 yards or more. This year, they're on pace for 13. So improvements there, not huge improvements. Turnovers wise, they're definitely improved. Last year, Notre Dame only had 15 turnovers the entire season. So in 13 games, they had 15 turnovers. Right now, Notre Dame is on pace for 21 on the season. So that's an improvement of 6. And again, you're about to play 4 offenses that aren't very good. And so there's going to be opportunities for Notre Dame to go out and have some success getting the football, honestly. And so when you look at who they play in the last 4 games, Stanford's been pretty good at not turning the ball over. They've only turned it over 5 times. They're ranked 11th. But Pitt this year has turned it over 8 times in 6 games. They rank 52nd. You look at Wake Forest, they rank 123rd in lost turnovers at 14 in 6 games. And Clemson actually ranked 73rd in turnovers. They've lost 10 in 6 games. Clemson is actually I believe the only team that Notre Dame plays that has a plus number on the season in turnovers. So even though Stanford has only turned it over 5 times, their defense only forced 3. So they only play one team the rest of the way that has turned it over, forced more turnovers than they've gained. That's it. So every other team they play is negative on the season in turnover margin. So another opportunity for Notre Dame to even pad their lead on last year's defense even more. Here's been a huge jump: pass defense. They were a pretty good pass defense last year, and when you think about last year's defense, to not, context is important. They played C.J. Stroud, they played Drake May, they played Caleb Williams, they played Spencer Rattler, they played Tanner McKee, they played Jaron Hall. So certainly played some good quarterbacks last year. This year, Kyle McCord's obviously that pass offense is very good. Duke's Riley Leonard's a very good quarterback, and of course Caleb Williams this past weekend. So both have played. Last year's defense played against better quarterbacks. I would argue this year's teams played against better receiving cores, top to bottom, than they did last year, and will by the end of the season. Again, because Stanford's, they got some pass catchers. We saw that against Colorado. Just not very good at quarterback. But right now, Notre Dame ranks 3rd in the country in fewest yards per game in the pass game, 7th in yards per attempt, 21st in yards per catch, 3rd in completion percentage, 8th in fewest touchdowns, 8th in interceptions. That 8th in fewest touchdowns is impressive. Notre Dame's given up 5 touchdowns in 8 games. They've played more games than most teams and still rank 8th in fewest touchdown passes allowed at 5. They gave up 20 last year. They've already got 9 interceptions in 8 games. They had 10 interceptions last year in 13 games. Quarterback rating, they've gone from 41st nationally to 4th, and that's despite having a defense that's not nearly as good at getting pressure on the quarterback. That's the one area that's been a problem, is sacks. They are way down, almost a full sack per game. Now, the hope is that, again, I'm going to say it again, the hope is that as they play a schedule that's not as good, that they're able to go out there and kind of pump those numbers up a little bit and have some success doing that. That's my hope. And the schedule should be set up that way. Clemson's got a pretty good, they've only given up 9 sacks in 6 games. They rank 32nd in fewest sacks allowed per game, which is pretty good. Pitt ranks 88th. Wake Forest ranks 131st, and Stanford ranks 118th. So there's opportunities for the Notre Dame pass defense to really rack up some sacks, and that's another reason why I said in the previous breakdown I want to see them turn that group loose a little bit more. This is the biggest difference right here. They've got a worse third down defense than last year. Again, you hope that it'll get better in the last part of the season. You hope that they'll improve as they face some offenses that aren't necessarily, light the world on fire third down offenses. Pitt's 104th, Clemson's 27th, as we talked about, Stanford's 38th, and then Wake Forest is 81st. So it should get better, have a chance to get better. But this stat right here, red zone defense has just made it's been a long time since I've seen a complete 180 jump like that than what they've done this year. I mean, it is a complete 180. Last year, now keep in mind, last year there were only 131 teams in college football. That's it. You played 131 teams. You ranked 131st in red zone defense last year. Notre Dame allowed opponents last season. This number still, I have a hard time fathoming this number. Last year, Notre Dame's defense allowed opponents to score 27 touchdowns on 34 red zone attempts. So on 34 red zone attempts, they only held them out of the end zone 7 times. This year, teams are 9 of 25. They've already created 16 red zone non-touchdown scoring drives and 9 total non-scoring drives, which is why Notre Dame, as you can see, ranks 7th in red zone touchdown defense and 4th in red zone defense compared to 130th and 131st last year. You have to give a ton of credit to the Notre Dame coaching staff for what they've been able to do this season when it comes to producing a really good red zone defense compared to a year ago when they literally had one of the worst in college football. That's impressive. And when you look at the rest of the year, Pitt actually has a pretty good red zone defense or red zone offense. They rank 20th in the country. They've only gotten to the red zone 15 times, which is just nutty. So right now, Pitt ranks they're tied for 125th in red zone chances at 15, but they have scored it 11 times. So Pitt right now ranks 20th in college football in red zone touchdown percentage. Clemson ranks 88th. Wake Forest ranks 133rd, and then Stanford ranks 111th. So there's a chance. I mean, they need to keep this going, and this is why I say teams if Notre Dame keeps going, should have a really tough time scoring on the Notre Dame defense this next 4 games because they don't play very good offenses and they have been elite. They have been absolutely elite, and it's really been impressive this season to watch. And when you think about who they've played so far this year, look, they haven't they haven't played a lot of teams that are great in the red zone. But part of the reason some of these teams aren't great in the red zone is because Notre Dame has shut them down the way that they have. So, Central Michigan, for example, is 15th in the country in red zone defense or red zone offense, touchdown offense. NC State is 41st. Duke is 35th. So even though they haven't played teams that are great at that, they're doing what they need to do. And we talked about USC was pretty good red zone offense coming into the season. They rank 5th. So they've only played 2 offenses that rank in the top 30, but still a lot of top 50 red zone touchdown defenses. And I'd be curious what those numbers would be with taking Notre Dame out of it. So, man, it's got to be impressed with what you're seeing. So huge jump this year defensively in just every area. And they were pretty good defense last year. They were a defensive driven team last year too. And then, of course, offensively, not the huge jumps on offense, but still a lot of improvement. Now we just need to see how this team can finish. So that is a look at Notre Dame football here as you look at the jump from year 1 to year 2. How we're going to feel about this overall, like right now, I feel good about it. I don't feel great about it. They've improved, certainly improved. Offense has improved in almost every area. Defense has really improved in almost every area. Special teams has gone down in almost every area. And I didn't pull that up, but they've gone down. I think kick return is up, but that's because of that big punt. They're down in just about every other area. Actually, I have this here. Pull it up. Special teams. They are field goal percentage is lower. They have a higher yards per punt this year, much lower net average. Last year they had 21 punts inside the 20. This year only 4. Last year they had only 3 touchbacks. They've already had 2 already. They have made a jump in kick return. They're way down in punt return. They're giving up more yards per punt return and more kick return yards. So special team, and then of course no blocks. Special teams has taken a big jump down, but the other two areas have definitely taken jumps, in some areas big jumps. So you feel good about it. Now it's about finish strong for Notre Dame. When you look at what this team can be, and you look at what this team is capable of, you can't change the first 8 games. It is what it is. You saw the numbers. Now it's about how you're going to be known is how you finish. And I said this after they lost to Louisville. So Marcus Freeman ultimately won't be judged by the Louisville game. Marcus Freeman will be judged by what he does after the Louisville game. And if you can come out of that, and that, I mean, it's an embarrassing loss, and just run the table, beat USC, beat Clemson, beat a rival Pitt, beat a rival Stanford, beat Wake Forest, now all of a sudden your program has a lot of momentum, and you start feeling a lot better about maybe taking another jump over these next 2 years and seeing what this Notre Dame team can be. So that's a look at where Notre Dame has improved this past season, which followed a breakdown of what I want to see Notre Dame do moving forward. Could have gone reverse order on that, but I really wanted to take a look at those last 4 games and talk about what I want to see from this team first, which gives some context, I feel, to the last part of the discussion. So I'm going to do a couple more things here. I'm going to take about a 60-second break. So I'm going to play the theme music and let that count down. It's going to run through for about a minute. So just give me some time to catch my breath, get my chart out for the games I'm going to break down, and then of course we got about 20 mailbag questions. So I want to I'll get to some of those here, and we'll do a little mailbag as well. So we're just going to briefly work through some of the big games. If you haven't checked it out already, go to the CFB Nation channel. Bill Bender and Bill Trotri had a guy, David Jones, from the Penn Live channel. They previewed Ohio State and Penn State, which is the big game this weekend. And they also talked about some of the other games in their other shows. So there's a whole show breaking down the Penn State-Ohio State game, plus a look. They talked in one of their shows that we read today about did Notre Dame end Caleb Williams' Heisman Trophy aspirations, which I thought was a pretty interesting discussion. So you want to check that out. So I'll see you guys here very soon. While you're waiting, do me a favor, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell. And in the minute that I'm gone, you could literally go to boardsbreakdown.com and sign up for a membership. You could literally get that done in the next minute while you're waiting on me to get back. So I'll talk to you guys here very soon on the Irish Breakdown podcast. All right, I am back. Thank you guys very much. I'm going to back to the Irish Breakdown podcast. We're going to talk a little bit about the upcoming games that are this weekend, and we're going to put this on the CFB Nation podcast platform. And obviously, CFB Nation is presented this year by Twisted Tea, which is our official sponsor of the season. Twisted Tea. Definitely want to check that out, and we'll have a little advertisement here for that later in the show, which will be pretty cool. But I'm going to go through some of the big games this weekend and just talk about it. We had a question the other day. Somebody asked me, what games I'm going to be watching this weekend. And so I'm going to break down a couple of those games and just share my thoughts on what I'm curious to see and what I think we'll see. And there's actually some games on this week, Wednesday. So when this podcast will be aired on Thursday. And so Thursday night, James Madison Marshall, 7:00 Eastern. I'm definitely looking forward to that game. But really the big games are going to be on Saturday. And those are the games that we're going to talk about here. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to fire away with some questions or comments. Love to hear what you guys are thinking about, uh, what you guys want to see and kind of what games you guys are going to watch and what you guys think about some of the games that I'm going to be uh, breaking down here. So, looking at these upcoming games this weekend, they really start at noon. I mean, right away at noon this season or this weekend, you're going to have a huge game. Number 7 Penn State and number 3 Ohio State. Here's something I want to ask all of you. I'm very curious about this. I want to hear from you guys. Who are you rooting for in this game? And I think right now, I don't know if the chat's down or something like that because we haven't had any new chats in several minutes. But I am curious to see kind of what you guys are looking to see in the game this weekend, and what game you're looking to who you think is going to win this game. Who do you want to win this game? I'm of the belief that if you're talking about what's better for Notre Dame, it's better for Ohio State to win this game. People have asked me that. Say why? Well, number one, Ohio State already is a nemesis for Notre Dame recruiting wise. If Penn State goes out and beats Ohio State, that gives them a boost that I don't want them to have, to be completely honest with you. Ohio State is a 4.5-point favorite. The game will be at noon on Fox. Obviously, Penn State has been a team in recent years that, y'all know that I'm not a big James Franklin fan, but his teams, you got to give him credit. His teams usually give Ohio State a battle. Last year, Ohio State won 44-31, but it was a more competitive game for that for a while. Ohio State pulled away late. Ohio State has won 6 games in a row, and they've won 10 of their last 11 games. The only win that Penn State has was a 24-20 win back in 2016, which is the year that Penn State won the Big Ten title, although Ohio State still went to the college football playoff. 2021, Buckeyes won 33-24 in Columbus. The 2020, they won by 13 in state college at Penn State. 2019 game, you saw Ohio State won 28-17. The previous game in Columbus, 39-38. That Ohio State obviously won that one as well. That was a great game. If you remember that game, Penn State had a big lead early. Ohio State, part of that, Saquon Barkley had a long kick return in the game, and that went for big play. So this is going to be an interesting game. And I know a lot of people think that Ohio State is not as good this year. I actually think Ohio State is very good this year. And I get why some people don't, because they're not the high octane offense that they were in the past. I get it. But I'm telling you, this is such a better Ohio State defense. I mean, we've talked about Notre Dame, and they're giving up 16 points a game. Ohio State on the season right now is only giving up 9.7 points per game. And they've played Indiana, they've played Western Kentucky, they've played Notre Dame, they've played Maryland, and they've played Purdue. Now, the schedule hasn't been just crazy good, but Western Kentucky's a team that scores over 30 points a game. Notre Dame's at 36 points a game. Maryland is 33 points per game. 17 is their low. Their lowest total coming into the Ohio State game was 31 against Michigan State on the road. Penn State's defense also this year has been very good from a statistical standpoint, only 8 points per game, so 2 really good defenses. But my point about Penn State is I don't think they've played anybody. That's kind of my big thing. Right now, the best team they've played so far is offensively is probably West Virginia. They have a really good win over Iowa, but Iowa has literally one of the worst offenses I've ever seen in my life. It might be worse than last year's. So Penn State's production has come against a schedule that honestly just doesn't have a lot of very good offensive football teams on it. So I'm just not as much of a believer in Penn State. They Illinois is averaging 20.3 points per game. Iowa's at 20.9. Northwestern's at 22. UMass is 22.9. Those are the teams that Penn State has beat this year. Like I said, the best offense that they've played this year is, as far as points per game, is Delaware, who is averaging like 29.3 at the FCS level. They have yet to play a team, including an FCS opponent, that scores 30 points a game this year. So I'm just not as sold on Penn State. I think Drew Aller's done a lot of good things this season. Their running game has not been as good as I thought it would be. To be honest with you, that surprises me when you consider how talented they are in the backfield. They've heated up a little bit lately. Went for 215 against Iowa, but that was 3.8 yards per carry, 3.4 against Northwestern. They got hot against UMass this week and went for 246, but let's be honest, guys, UMass's defense is not very good. They're giving up 222 yards per game. Penn State went for 246. Toledo, the week before, went for 375, 9.6 yards per carry. Eastern Michigan went for 214, 8.2 per carry. Auburn went for 289 against UMass, 6.6 yards per carry. And New Mexico State went for 210 at 5.7 yards per carry. Penn State went for 246, 6.7 per carry. It's like basically what everybody else has done to that defense all year. So I'm not sold that Penn State's going to be able to run the ball this weekend on an Ohio State run defense that's been pretty good. Notre Dame went for 176 on them. Then the other 5 opponents, 123 from Purdue, 106 from Maryland, 80 from Western Kentucky, 99 from Youngstown State, and 71 from Indiana. So now, as I said, Ohio State hasn't played a bunch of juggernauts either, but they've played better teams than Penn State has played so far, to me. So I'm just not sold on Penn State. They'll get their chance to prove it this weekend, but I don't see them beating Ohio State this weekend. I think Ohio State's going to win that game. I think the battle between the Ohio State receivers and the Penn State DPs is going to be a ton of fun to watch. Kyle McCord's going to have to figure out ways to get some of the other guys to football. Ohio State's going to have to find ways to get Marvin Harrison going in this game. That's going to be easier said than done against what I think is a Penn State pass defense that's pretty good. You know, I mean, you look at the numbers, they're giving up 121 yards a game. They haven't played a whole lot of teams that throw the ball very well, to be honest with you. So Penn State's a lot like Michigan. I just don't know how good they are, but at least Michigan to me has been a little bit more impressive defensively. Like you watch them, like, man, they're elite. I think Penn State is a very good defense. I just don't know that it's as good as Ohio State's, especially when you look at who they've played. So we'll find out this weekend. I could be wrong. I have Ohio State winning that game, but it's going to be an interesting battle. Certainly going to be an interesting battle between two teams right now that are fighting for the playoff. And honestly, the loser of this game, as long as it's close, that's a good shot at being the second team in the Big Ten. They both get a shot to knock off Michigan. So let's say Penn State loses and then goes and beats Michigan, finish 11-1. They'll have a shot to get into the college football playoff, even 11-1. And let's say Ohio State also beats Michigan. What could get crazy is if Penn State beats Ohio State beats Michigan beats Penn State or something like that. That could make this league really, really crazy. But I think one of these two teams is going to lose a couple. We'll see if that's the case. But you could end up with a case of 3 Big Ten teams with 1 loss if they kind of all beat each other, right? So if let's say Ohio State beats Penn State beats Michigan beats Ohio State, something like they can all only end with 1 loss, which would just be absolutely crazy this season. So I'm going to kind of go through these games as we talk, sort of just in order of kickoff. UCF Oklahoma, as I told y'all yesterday, I'll have a big TV set up. I'll have my computer set up with its monitor on. I'll have an external monitor hooked up to my laptop, and then I'll have an iPad. So I'll be able to watch 4 games at a time. And the other games I'm going to have on at noon, I'm going to have UCF Oklahoma. I'm very curious to see how Oklahoma bounces back after great win over Texas and then a bye week. I'll have Air Force and Navy on, another one of my my TVs, and see how that one goes. And then I'll kind of be scrolling between the others, check out a little bit of the Mississippi State Arkansas game, see if Arkansas can get back on track. I'll maybe check out a little bit of the Baylor Cincinnati game. Not a lot of other great games on at noon. And then so we'll see some really good games on at 3:30. That's a stretch where I'm very curious to see some football today or on Saturday. Starts off for me, my big TV, it's going to be set up on Alabama and Tennessee. That's going to be the game that I'm going to be primarily watching during the 3:30 time frame, because these are 2 teams that are winning but just not winning pretty right now. Alabama's earned some quality wins since their loss to Texas. They had a ugly win over South Florida, really grinded out win over Ole Miss. They smacked Mississippi State pretty good. Nice 6-point win against Tennessee, or I mean Texas A&M on the road. They beat Arkansas last week by 3 at home. So again, they're winning. They're just kind of winning ugly, like Notre Dame did last year. Tennessee, since they lost to Florida, they smacked Tennessee or Texas San Antonio. They smacked South Carolina. They just played Texas A&M this past weekend, beat them by a touchdown. So there is that common opponent. Neither team really put that team away. Texas A&M had a 10-7 lead on Tennessee in the second quarter. Actually, at halftime, Tennessee took a lead middle of the third quarter, never lost it. When you look at the Alabama game against Texas A&M, I thought Texas A&M kind of controlled that game a little bit longer. But again, second half, Alabama took over that game. They tied it about middle of the third quarter, took a lead late in the third quarter that they never lost. So both teams, neither is really doing a great job to me offensively right now, but they're winning, and that's the key, which makes this game a little bit hard to evaluate, right? I mean, I'm going with Alabama in this game. They're a 9.5-point favorite. Game's going to be, as I said, 3:30 on CBS. It's good. That game's going to be, I mean, I think it's going to be lower scoring. I do. Tennessee's defense has been improved in recent games. It's again, they're not. They played Texas San Antonio, who didn't have their quarterback Frank Harris, didn't play in that game. They lost their head coach or their play caller from last year. They lost him to Oregon. So Tennessee's defense is better. They haven't played a lot of really good defenses, or offenses. But if you look at Tennessee, the most yards they've given up all year is 349. When they lost to Florida 29-16, that's the most points they've given up all year. So they've actually been better on defense this year, but they haven't really been tested a whole lot. Alabama's defense is very good. Held Texas A&M to 13. That team scored 20 against Alabama. I think it's going to be a lower scoring game. I just don't have a lot of faith that Joe Milton can go on the road and make the throws he needs to make to win this game. My hope is, I mean, honestly, I'd like to see Tennessee win to some degree just because, me, I have a hard time rooting for Alabama. But I'm picking Alabama in this game. I think it's going to be low scoring. Bama being at home, I think their quarterback will make a couple more plays than Tennessee's quarterback. The wild card could be if Tennessee can get its ground game going. Jalen Wright and Jabari Small are a really nice 1-2 punch. They're averaging about 150 yards a game between the two of them. Dylan Sampson is also a kid that has is kind of been a bit of a big play guy at times for them this year. He had a big game against Texas San Antonio. He's a guy that is kind of that number 3 guy in that group. So Tennessee's run game this year has been pretty darn good. Can they get that going against Alabama? Find out. That's going to be the key. Because I don't think they can go out and throw the ball really well on this Alabama secondary. I think they're going to have a hard time with that. But Joe Milton's going to have to make some big plays. If he can, they may have a shot to pull off the upset. I'm just believing when I see it mode. South Carolina, Missouri. Missouri's rolling 6-1, the number 20 in the country. South Carolina's they're a wounded animal, man, and they're either going to fold or they're going to fight back and pick off get a big win. They've lost 3 of their last 4. Lost to Georgia, game they were leading at halftime. Got blown out by Tennessee. Lost last week to Florida in a game that, they led by 10 points in the fourth quarter. Led by 10 points. Florida scored to make it 37-34 with 4:40 left, and then took the lead at 47 with 47 seconds left to win that game. So they kind of blew that game. South Carolina blew that game. Took like I said, took a 10-point lead, had a 10-point lead, scored to go up 10 in the fourth quarter, 9 minutes left, and couldn't hold on. So they're scrambling. South Carolina's really scrambling. They're going to have to see if they can figure something out and get this thing back on track. So that's going to be a very interesting contest at 3:30. That'll be on one of my monitors. I'll tell you a game that won't be on one of my monitors. That's Minnesota and Iowa. There's some ugly Big Ten games on this weekend, folks. Minnesota, Iowa is going to be low scoring. Wisconsin, Illinois is going to be low scoring. Northwestern and Nebraska, probably low scoring. Those are going to be some ugly football games. Another 3:30 game I'm looking forward to watching is Pittsburgh at Wake Forest. Obviously, these are 2 Notre Dame opponents. Wake Forest is 3-3. Pitt's 2-4. Pitt has a little bit of momentum. After they made the quarterback change, they benched Phil Dracovic, moved him to tight end. And this past weekend started they had a transfer quarterback start this weekend. Kid named Christian Velo, I think is how you say his name. He is another transfer that they had come in. He came in from Penn State. Had played a little bit at Penn State the last couple of years. He started this past week. Was okay. went 12 of 26, 2 touchdowns, 200 yards, ran the ball 17 times. Made some plays when he needed to, made some plays when he needed to. This will be his second start of the season. Wake Forest has obviously been struggling offensively this season so far. We'll see if they can kind of get going against Pitt's defense, which has been a little up and down this year, but did what they needed to do this past week to beat Louisville. That pick six was 24-21. Pitt was winning. And it was, I think, third quarter. Let me look at the box score. I believe it was the third quarter when that happened. Give me a second. Pull that up. So it's 24-21. Yes, it was late in the third quarter. About a minute left in the third quarter. Sebo Flemister just rushed for a second touchdown of the game to give Pitt a 24-21 lead. Louisville was winning 21-17. They picked it off, ran it back 86 yards for a touchdown, and Louisville never recovered. And then they punched one in the end zone with about 3 minutes left to put the game away. So Pitt's defense last week stepped up and, made stops when they needed to make stops. Gave up a lot of yards, gave up 430 yards last week, but, shut down the Louisville run game and then forced 3 turnovers, which was big. So we'll see if they keep that going. I really don't have a preference on who I'd like to see win. I have a hard time rooting for Pat Narduzzi. So, part of me wants to say, well, if Pitt wins, that's 2 in a row. Notre Dame coach can say to him, hey, guys, since they made the switch at quarterback, they've won 2 games in a row. You got your boy Sebo Flemisters on that other team. There's things that can get you fired up if Pitt wins, but I have a hard time rooting for Pat Narduzzi. So that's a bit of a tough one. But I'm looking forward to watching that game. Oklahoma State at West Virginia. It's a big game. Like, no one's talking about it because neither team's great. But Oklahoma State went through a really rough 2 weeks. They lost to South Alabama at home 33-7 and then lost at Iowa State. And if y'all haven't paid attention this year, Iowa State's not that good. They're not a very good football team this season. They're 4-3. Actually, Iowa State is actually better than I thought. They were 2-3. Last time I watched them play against Oklahoma, they've won their last 2, beat TCU and Cincinnati. So Iowa State's a little better, but they lost to Iowa State, but then they bounced back and beat Kansas State at home. They beat Kansas at home 39-32. Now they got to go on the road and play West Virginia in a game that's a must-win for both teams. West Virginia's 4-2. They're coming off of a loss to Houston. I don't know if you guys saw the end of that game. That was a wild finish. And honestly, should have won that game. They should be sitting here 5-1, but they blew that game. I'm very curious to see how West Virginia handles that defeat. Very curious, because that's one of those games that could completely derail a team to lose that way on that type of Hail Mary. And it was I think it was a Thursday night game. So they've had to sit in that for a couple extra days. And so both of these teams need this game in a big way. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing that game. May not be one that excites a lot of you, but I'll have that game on one of my monitors, no doubt. I'll have Texas Houston on one of my monitors as well. Night games are solid. You have Ole Miss at Auburn. Big game for Ole Miss. They've got to keep rolling. This is the kind of game that you'd see Ole Miss teams kind of sleepwalk through in the past and maybe get knocked off, maybe get upset. When Auburn's been decent this year, they're not a great team by any stretch, but they compete. They competed against, Georgia, lost, but competed. They battled and gained some respect for them. Battled against Texas A&M in a game that wasn't overly close, and then they just got blown out this last week by LSU. So they battle, but I don't know if they have the horses if Ole Miss comes to play. Will Ole Miss come to play or not? And we'll find that out. But that'll be a question that we'll have to find out. TCU at Kansas State. TCU is a team that has been struggling at times this season. Seemed to get back on track after losing to Colorado, won 3 in a row, blew out Houston, whooped SMU pretty good. Then they lost back-to-back games against West Virginia, Iowa State. Bounced back last week and blew out BYU. So we'll see if TCU can kind of build some momentum here with a road game at Kansas State. Obviously, that was a very interesting one through 2 games last year. TCU had a great comeback to win the regular season game. Kansas State bounced back and won the Big 12 title game, which is interesting because TCU obviously went to the playoff, but Kansas State was the Big 12 champs last year. 7:30, Duke and Florida State. That's going to be a big game. I don't know if Riley Leonard is going to be playing in this game. Let me just look up real quick, see if Riley Leonard, if there's any word on if he's going to play or not this week. And it says he could return is the latest update that I saw 3 hours ago. They haven't announced it yet, but they have said he could return this weekend. Says there's a chance that Riley Leonard could play. We'll see. If he doesn't play, Duke has no chance to beat Florida State at Florida State. If he does play, then Duke has a chance because Duke is a very, very good defense. And Florida State's offensive line has been a little shaky at times this year. And as we saw against Notre Dame, Duke has the kind of D line to create some havoc and create some problems. And Duke is going to have to find ways to get the ball down the field. They're going to have to find ways to get the run game going against a pretty good Florida State defensive line. So the matchup with the Duke offense against the Florida State defense is not great. Florida State's defense has been good this year. They're not great, but they're good. Their rush defense, for the most part, has been good. They gave up 209 to Virginia Tech in a blowout win, held Syracuse to 124, Clemson to 146, BC to 152, Southern Miss to 104, and then LSU only had 113. Duke can't beat them if Duke can't run the football. That's just a fact. They can't beat them if they can't run the ball. Florida State's offense is driven by its run game. They've gone for 306 against Southern Miss, 282 against Virginia Tech, 191 against Syracuse, but only 22 against Clemson, only 128 against BC, and only 135 against LSU. That's going to be the key for Duke is shut down the run game as best you can, get them in some third and longs, some third down situations. Florida State's third down offense to me has been a little bit inconsistent at times this year. But if you can have some success getting them in those situations, you can come up with some ops. I think Duke's secondary can hold their own against Florida State's receivers if they're able to put pressure on the quarterback. If they can't, then it's going to be a long day because they're just going to throw the ball up to those big receivers. So I don't know that Duke has the horses to win this football game. If Riley Leonard plays, I do think they can at least compete with Florida State, maybe force a couple mistakes to try to win the football game. And somebody just brought this up about Jordan Travis. I believe that Jordan Travis is slated to play. I know he got banged up last week, but I haven't heard anything about him not being out. And I know that Johnny Wilson's going to be back, and the latest I had read is that he's going to play. So I don't anticipate. And he actually came back after getting knocked out last week too. So I do expect him to play. Michigan plays at Michigan State. That's going to be ugly. They're going to blow Michigan out. 8 o'clock, couple really interesting 8 o'clock games. Utah, USC. USC is a touchdown favorite. This could be. This is going to be I'll say it this way. This is going to be one of two things for USC. One, they're going to bounce back and roll Utah. I mean, roll Utah. Because Utah's offense is just not good. It's not good. And I don't see Cameron Rising playing. I don't. They've been saying for a few weeks that he could be back, he could be back, he could be back. I don't see it. I don't see him coming back. I just not for this game. And if he does, I don't see him being overly effective, to be honest with you. So because I don't believe he is back yet, right? He didn't play this past week. I'm going to sit here and talk about it. I don't expect him to see him back. And he didn't play last week. I don't anticipate him playing. Utah this year is only thrown 4 touchdown passes on the season. They only average 149 passing yards a game. They're okay running the ball. Average 172 yards per game, but they're only averaging 3.95 yards per carry. I don't think Utah has what it takes to stop them. And I know that USC's offense showed some cracks last week, and Utah can get after the quarterback now. I mean, they can be disruptive. That's been the fuel. Jonah Ellis has got 13 tackles for loss, and 9 sacks on the season. So, obviously they can get after the quarterback. Can they do to USC what Utah did? We're going to find out. Now, I think they're going to bounce back. The problem that Utah has, in my opinion, is they don't have the same secondary that they had last year because they lost Clark Phillips. Their secondary was a little shaky anyway, and they haven't really played a team with the kind of athletes that USC is going to have. Oregon State had pretty good success throwing the ball on them. They only had 227 yards, but they only completed 15 passes through 26 attempts. They were 8.7 yards per attempt in that game. And then Florida had some success against them. They threw for 333 yards. The rest of the teams they've played aren't great passing teams. And so I'm not high on Utah's pass defense. I know the numbers are good, but I'm just not a believer. I also think USC has a little bit of motivation to kind of bounce back against them because USC or Utah beat them twice last year, embarrassed them in the Pac-12 title game. If USC can't bounce back from this game mentally and schematically, it could get really ugly down the stretch. Because here's the thing. If you look at USC's schedule the rest of the way, they play Utah this weekend at home. Then they go to Cal the next weekend. Then they play Washington at home, at Oregon, and then home at UCLA with no breaks. No breaks. So they had a battle against they had the close game against Colorado. Then they had a bye. No, actually they didn't. When did they have a bye? Their bye was after the Stanford game. Ooh. And then they have another bye last week of the year. So USC has not had a bye since the weekend of September 16th. So you had 4 straight games so far: Arizona State, Colorado, Arizona, Notre Dame. Last 2 games especially were battles. You got Utah coming up. If they don't win this game and they go 6-2, they're going to lose at least 2 more games because it tells me this team has no mental toughness. If they bounce back, then perhaps they can split one of those 2 big games. They're going to lose at least 1 more game this year, in my opinion. But we're going to find out just what kind of head coach Lincoln Riley is. We know he's a great offensive mind, but I've always said I don't think he's a very good head coach. And we're going to find that out because this is going to be one of the toughest stretches he's ever had to face because he's going to face a couple teams that have better talent than what he's had. And right now, this season so far, USC's 6-0 against teams that they have the better roster. They're 0-1 against teams that have a better roster than he has. And Oregon has a better roster than he has, and Washington has a better roster than he has. And so we're going to find out what Lincoln Riley's made of as a head coach. We're going to really find that out. So I'm curious to see how they bounce back. I don't know what to make of this game as far as the mental part. If you're just looking talent versus talent, scheme versus scheme, I think USC wins this game, and I think USC can win this game convincingly. I do. And Notre Dame's offense didn't play great last week, but USC's defense played better. Let's see if their front 4 can be disruptive. Let's see if Alex Grinch can limit the big plays and have some success. I'm taking USC bouncing back and winning this football game. Another 8 o'clock game that I will absolutely be paying attention to. This will be on one of my monitors, so it'll be a bigger game for me. So it's Clemson and Miami. I'm pulling for Clemson in this one. Obviously, if you're a Notre Dame fan, Clemson needs to get this win. I want to see Clemson get a couple W's, be ranked when Notre Dame plays them. I think that's good for Notre Dame. Miami's reeling a bit right now. They started the season off well, started off 4-0, had all convincing wins, blew out Miami of Ohio. It's the only loss Miami of Ohio has had so far. Had a convincing win over Texas A&M, blew out Bethune-Cookman, blew out Temple, 4-0. Jumped into the top 20, and then they lose at home to Georgia Tech. In just what was a ugly finish to the game. Terrible decision by Mario Cristobal to hand the ball off instead of taking a knee. Bad officiating call, causing the fumble. And then they blew it, gave up the big pass play this past week. They actually led North Carolina at halftime. Tyler Van Dyke threw an absolute rope. It was a phenomenal ball. I think it was 14-10 at the time. And linebacker's coming free. He's got a one-on-one outside. He throws it. He knows he's about to get drilled. He got drilled, but just launched it down the field. Guy ran under for a touchdown. Great play. Was really impressed by that particular play. That was actually, it was 7-7 when he made that touchdown pass. That gave him a 14-7 lead. North Carolina tied it at 14-14. Miami went down, kicked a field goal to make it 17-14, and then North Carolina just stomped them in the second half. Lead went from they were losing 14-7 at halftime to they had a 38-17 lead. Miami scored last to make it 41-31. It wasn't even that close in the second half. Miami's reeling in a big way. Clemson's coming off of an ugly win over Wake Forest. They won 17-12. They got a bye week this week. They got a chance to kind of get right. They got 2 tough road games in a row before Notre Dame, and they play Miami this week and NC State next week. The key for me is going to be this: can the Clemson offense get on track? That's going to be the key. Miami is probably going to have a tough time moving the ball and scoring on this Clemson defense. This is a very good Clemson defense that we've seen this year. Giving up 19 points a game, it's a little bit misleading. They gave up 31 to Florida State, 28 to Duke. Some of those points against Duke were off the defense, basically. They're a very good defense. Total yards, only giving up 261.8 yards per game, only giving up 4.2 yards per play. Rush defense are only giving up 86.3 yards per game on the season. Their pass defense, they've only given up 5 touchdown passes, and they've picked off 5 passes, only giving up 175.5 yards per game. Disruptive defense, they've got 44 tackles for loss. They're at 7 tackles for loss per game this season. Very disruptive defense. Defensive line has been pretty good. Tamorian Parker is a freshman who I had in my top 100. He's got 4 sacks on the season already. So it's going to be a battle for them to score, Miami to score, but they can still win this game because I don't right now have a lot of faith in Clemson's offense. You just don't know. They scored 17 points against Wake Forest, and I know Wake's better on defense this year, but they're not that much better on defense this year. Miami's defense has been up until the North Carolina game, they've been good. The problem is they hadn't really played any good offenses. They shut down Miami of Ohio, held them to 215, 3 points, held Bethune and Temple to 7 points each, gave up 23 to Georgia Tech, but only gave up 250 yards. Texas A&M, though, scored 33 on them and had 433 yards. And then North Carolina went for 508 on them and scored 41 points. So the only 2 good offenses they played scored on them. Clemson's not a good offense. But can Clemson do enough on offense to win this game? We're going to find out. They're going to need to. And if you're a Notre Dame fan, I think them winning is good for you because it also gives another blackout of Miami, and it makes recruits question, is Miami really a good football team? Yeah, they recruit well, but is that a coach that can really win? I don't know the answer to that. And then I'll have my eye on at 10:30, Pac-12 After Dark, UCLA and Stanford, just because I want to see if I want to watch Dante Moore. I like watching Dante play. He's a really good quarterback. And, of course, I want to see if Stanford can build on last week's success against Colorado. I have my doubts, but we'll see. And then one of my monitors will also be on Arizona State at Washington. Washington is my number 2 ranked team in the country, my IB top 25. And I just enjoy watching that offense play. That's going to be a big key. So that's going to do it for the college football breakdown for the week. I'm going to do a mailbag next. But before we do, folks, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell. This would be a podcast platform. Do us a favor. Give us a 5-star review. We'd greatly appreciate that. And if you have not done so, sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, folks, let's dive into some mailbag questions. You guys have some good ones today. I want to answer as many as I possibly can. We're going to start off here with, and I have no idea how to say that name, so I'm not going to try and butcher it. But I do thank you, whoever you are, for the super chat. Appreciate that very, very much. There's a lot of questioning right now if our quarterback and receivers have the talent and ability to play better and execute. It's getting a bit ugly in the criticism of some people, and I'd appreciate your input on this. Well, I think they can play better, and I think they can execute. I talked about this earlier. I don't think talent is the issue at receiver. There's been a couple issues. It's young at some spots. One of your oldest players, a converted running back. You've had injuries of your 2 other veteran players. Jaden Thomas has been banged up half the year with hamstring injury. Deion Colsey's been out most of the year with a knee injury. And you're playing a lot of young guys. I mean, there's times on Saturday where they had 3 true freshmen at running back on the field, a receiver on the field. So it's not talent. I don't think they've been developed incredibly well. I don't believe there's been a lot of confidence in that group from the quarterback position or the offensive coordinator position, which needs to change. It's your guys' job to bring that group along. You got a 6-year quarterback and an offensive coordinator who's been a receivers coach. It's your guys' job to get that group going, and then that group's got to step up and make plays. It's not about talent. It's about they got to play better. They got to play with more urgency, and they've got to execute better. I mean, look, here's the deal. If Sam Hartman throws a better ball to Tobias Merrill on that post route against Duke, and then if Tobias makes the catch instead of dropping those 2 balls that he dropped against Duke later, we might be singing a different tune right now about the receiving core in the pass game. Maybe that would have been the thing that sparked that offense to get going. I don't know. Maybe it would have, but we don't know because those plays weren't made. That's the key. So look, people like to tear others down, and that's fine. They want to fire everybody, and that's fine. I mean, people have the right to do that. I mean, even if they would not appreciate it if somebody kept going on social media calling for them to be fired, probably won't like that very much. But that's what fans think that they have the right to do, and they do have the right to do, and they think that that's something that's wise, and they do it. It's not something that I do here. But the fact is it's got to get better. It does. I mean, that's where we can all agree. It's got to get better. You got to coach better. You got to play better. You got to plan better. All of it. It's got to be better. It's got to be better. And so if it does, we'll find out. We'll find out. And this team will have a chance to be pretty good. It will. I just don't. I look right now with the pass game. Tobias can make plays. Chris Tyree can make plays. Jordan Faison can make plays. There's a lot of guys can make plays. They just got to start making them. And Chris Tyree's really been the only guy that's his big play per target ratio is clearly the best on the team. Just got to do more to get him the football. That's going to be the key. And when those times come, you got to make those plays. That's really where it's at. T Gunn asks, can you give us an example of an offensive play call and how it needs to be altered later in the game? How you might do that? Well, we kind of broke this down in the upon further review, right? Notre Dame ran a play earlier in the game. I mean, and everybody calls plays differently. So if you're asking a play call, I mean, some people will just call plays by concept. So I've been at places where every route had a number. So you'd call like 937 and then you'd tag like the tight end, like 937, stick, something like that. I've been on offenses where the concepts have a name. That's kind of how I've always done it. So like when I was at Duquesne, all of our plays had names of like NFL teams. We had like Dolphins, Steelers, Rams. They were all like Rams is our smash concept. Dolphins was our double post concept. And then we'd run like counters. Also like Miami was like our post. It would look like double post, but then the inside guy would run a corner. So our scissors was called like Miami. So they all had those type of names. That's kind of how my offense was that I had when I ran it. Other teams will kind of give it like different names. Like they'll call a number and then a name. The number is like the protection, and then the direction of the would protect. I mean, there's all types of different ways to do it. But how it's altered, you can alter it different ways. Number one is you can alter it by a call. So you can tag a call. So if you're going to run, double posts and then you think that they're playing that outside post high, we've seen Notre Dame do scissors where they'll run a post corner from the number 2 guy. But another concept we had is if teams were really jumping that outside post, we would stick that post for 2 steps and then run and break it off on a corner and just throw it out to the sideline and it'd be wide open. So that's you can tag it, right? You can tag Dolphins, like I'm just using a name that we call it, Dolphins, and then tag like the corner, or you'd give it a new name, could call it something different. Florida, where you tag it to where that's what you're running. You can also just, if you want to make it up in the middle of the game, you can just say, hey, we're gonna call Dolphins or NASCAR X corner, something like that. You can tag it that way, and you can middle the game. You can, however you need to do it, however you need to change it. If it's a new play call, hey, we're gonna put in this. We're gonna do this. Other ways you can change it in the middle of the game is to change the formation. So hey, and this is what Notre Dame did on that play to Chris Tyree. So earlier in the game, at a 3-by-1, so 3 receivers and then a guy out wide, they were getting a lot of single high safety looks. When they went to the reduced tight end look, you were seeing more of the safety coming over to the tight end, and then you get man on man over the 3 receivers. So earlier in the game, Notre Dame ran that. It was a go by number 1, a post by number 2, and then an out by number 3. Well, against single high, you can play that better because the corner will take the outside go, which Notre Dame wasn't looking at. The free safety will play the post, and then you've got a flat defender kind of getting up underneath that out cut. And then a linebacker flat defender can kind of high-low that, or that field safety can take the out cut, and the backside safety will then take the post. So there's different ways they could get into that coverage if they're going to play single high. Well, if you can get them to where they're going to go man to the field and have that safety bracketing the tight end backside, because that's been your main dude, then that's a better look. And Notre Dame felt they could get Miami or get USC into that look. And against man-to-man, that post is a much better look. Earlier in the game, Faison ran the post. He got jammed up. Tyree ran the out. Second time they ran it, Faison ran the out. That field safety ran with him because it was man. And then that left Chris Tyree one-on-one on the nickel, and he smoked him for a big play. So all you did was alter the formation, and who was number 2, who was number 3. That's it. Same call, same concept, but you altered it that way. So that's more of just we like to play. We just want to get to a different look. Other times you may put in you got to tag something because you need to run a different route as part of that combination. So that's the best thing I come up with on the fly for that answer. Also from T Guns, he says, when your defense gives you, actually, Tommy, I don't have the second part of that question. So I'm not going to be able to answer that one because I didn't do it, and I'm not going to be able to go back up and find the other part. Sorry, buddy. You can ask me, you can text me the question. I'll try to answer best I can. 99 props, BK1, has the commitment of Deuce Knight had an impact on any 24 prospects, primarily wide receivers or tight ends, who now see back-to-back classes with CJ and Deuce? I have to think that's a plus. Is a fourth wide receiver possible in 24? No. They don't need another receiver. You got to think, guys, they've got Deion Colsey has another year left. Jaden Thomas has another year left. Chris Tyree can come back again. Tobias Merriweather, it comes back, right? So that's 4 right there. You have a 5-man freshman class right now because Jordan Faison's now on scholarships. You have Jaden Greathouse, you have Rico Flores, you have Braylon James. Now you have Rico Flores, and then KK Smith will be back next year too, who I like a lot. So you'll have 9 receivers next year already, and then 12 when you bring in the new freshmen. It's plenty of receivers. You don't need a 4th receiver. You need to go to the portal. Going to the portal for a receiver, unless it's like a star, would be lazy, in my opinion. We don't care about development, so we're just going to go get a proven guy that somebody else developed and play him. And that would stunt the growth of the players on the team. I do not want to see that at all from this. If you don't have a coach that can develop those guys and get a new coach, I think the coach can. He just has to do better. And we'll see if he gets a chance to do that, or if he sticks around and does that for next year. We'll find that out. To answer the other question, I think it has to a degree. I mean, there aren't a whole lot of 24 guys they're going after, just Carter Nelson. So could having Deuce Knight along with CJ Carr maybe help with Carter Nelson? Possibly. The big impact from Deuce Knight, however, is going to be with the 25 kids. That's been the big impact. And that's normally how it is. Like, having CJ Carr didn't necessarily have any impact on the 23 receivers to the degree that they weren't interested in their name, and then CJ comes along and has an impact. But when you got CJ early, did it matter? And it helped solidify Notre Dame for them? Absolutely it did. Was it the driving force? No. And it's the same thing here with Deuce and the 24 kids. Does it matter? Yeah, it matters. Is it going to be the driving force in their decision? Probably not, but it might for 25 kids. So it's a little bit different. 99 also asks us, with so many names on the board at multiple positions for 25, is there a clear pecking order at positions such as receiver, safety, cornerback, and DE edge? Or is the strategy take whoever wants first? It's a little bit of both. So all those positions are guys where you're going to have multiple guys in your pecking order. And the way you do it is you're breaking into groups. So like, let's say a receiver, there's like 5 kids you like a lot, and you're only going to take 3. Any one of those 5 kids wants to come, you take them. Any of the 5. Group of the second group, you may not take those guys right away. Does that mean among that 5, is there a necessary pecking order in that top of group of 5? Maybe not. Sometimes there is. And there's always a ranking. This guy's our number 1 guy. This guy's number 2. This guy's number 5. But you take all the guys from that group. Now, sometimes you may have a guy he's just so much better than everybody else. He's in a group by himself. And you may say, hey, look, we need to make sure that there's a spot safe for him, or we're taking that kid no matter what. But yes, there's a pecking order at each of those positions. But they're also grouped together to where you're not going to pass on one guy who's in that top group because you're waiting on the guy that might be a spot higher than him. Usually doesn't work like that either. Where that will impact it, where that'll happen sometimes is a quarterback. or a position where you're only taking like one guy, running back maybe, if you're only taking one guy in a class, tight end if you're only taking one guy in a class. Usually though, it's here's my top group, and we're gonna go after that guy. Here's a question I've been getting a lot lately from USMA 87. Why has Notre Dame not offered legacy Pritchett tight end? Is the room that strong? Well, two reasons. Number one, yes, it is. When the 25 class shows up, you'll have Eli Raridan, Holden Stace, Cooper Flanagan, Jack Larson, and they're hoping Carter Nelson. And they've offered another legacy commit in the 25 class that Notre Dame thinks is better right now, and that's James Flanagan, whose dad is Jim Flanagan. So you've got two legacy tight ends in the 25 class. James Flanagan's the better prospect, in my opinion. And I like Marshall Pritchett. I do. I think he's a good football player. And if Notre Dame needs to take a second tight end in the 25 class and they want to take Marshall Pritchett, I'm fine with that. The reason you can't offer him is because you're not ready to take a commitment from him. He's one of those guys that you'd had a pretty good shot at getting him if you offered him. The problem is they weren't ready to take him yet. There was other guys on the board. You got to remember, too, they had an early commitment from Nate Roberts, and they like James Flanagan better. Right now, Notre Dame's trying to get Carter Nelson as the second tight end in 24, and then James Flanagan would be the only tight end in 25. If they don't get Carter Nelson, then Notre Dame can expand the board in 25, and then I think Marshall Pritchett's a guy that they could certainly look at. But right now, the board is that strong, and you don't take legacy kids just because they're legacies. You've got to take legacy kids because they can help you, and they can help you win. And right now, Notre Dame views James Flanagan, another legacy, as the better prospect. And I think they're right on. I think they're correct on that. So I do believe that, that's something I can agree with. I can agree with him on that. And, I have no problem with it. I mean, I love legacies. I do. It's great. And I think Marshall Pritchett is a good football player, but I completely understand why they're in that situation and why they haven't offered him. Thomas Lammers with a question. Thank you, Thomas. Your current playoff predictions. Well, all but Notre Dame is still in it for me for my playoff predictions. So my playoff predictions were I had Georgia, Notre Dame, Washington, and Ohio State. That's my four. Notre Dame's out. Ohio State's still and the other three all control their own destiny. They're all undefeated. If they win out, they control their own destiny. They're in. So those three I still have. I think Ohio State beats Penn State this weekend. I still think they beat Michigan at Michigan at the end of the year. So I still have Ohio State in. Georgia I still have in, although the Brock Bowers injury gives me a little bit pause. But it just depends on who they play in the SEC title game. That's really going to what it comes down to. That's going to get very fascinating. Because here's the thing, like let's say Alabama wins out, just for argument's sake. Alabama would have a win over Ole Miss, win over Texas A&M, win over Tennessee, win over LSU. That's some pretty good wins. And then they have a win over Georgia. Their only loss would be all the way back to September 9th over Texas. And then they'd have some great wins since then. They're in. And then so you got to show, well, what about Georgia? Does Georgia get in now with that schedule that they've played? So if Georgia loses to Bama, their best wins on the year would be like Ole Miss, Tennessee, who'd be ranked a lot lower because they would have lost to Bama, Missouri, Kentucky. I mean, it's not a great schedule. Georgia would probably get in that situation, and you get two SEC teams again, which I think the way the SEC is this year would be a joke if two teams get in. I don't think Bama runs the table, though. So I still have Georgia in, still have Washington in, still have Ohio State in. Right now, the team who has the best combination of a really good win plus a schedule that sets up nicely to really run the table is Texas and Oklahoma, one of those two teams. What'll be interesting is if they both run the table and then Texas beats Oklahoma in the Big 12 title game. Do they both get in? Does Texas get in at that point in time? I think Texas gets in if that happens because they will have played twice on a neutral field. Texas will have a win. They'll have the win over Oklahoma plus a win over Alabama. So overall resume would be better than Oklahoma, who will have a win over Texas, and that's it. I mean, Texas is not going to have if Oklahoma loses to Texas in the Big 12 title game and they go 12-1, or they will have one win over a ranked team all year, and that was over Texas, a team that just beat them. So, and their schedule down the stretch is UCF, Kansas, Oklahoma State, West Virginia, BYU, and TCU. The Big 12 is down this year. It's very down this year. And then Texas's remaining schedules: Houston, BYU, Kansas State, TCU, Iowa State, and Texas Tech. So I can see both of those teams running the table. And then the winner of that game basically gets the 4th spot. That's how I predict it right now. That's kind of how I see it playing out at the present moment, based on how things are. Joe Allen, how about Xavier Watts, my hometown boy, getting Defensive Player of the Week? That's the Bronco Nagurski Player of the Week, by the way. How much more do you think it will drive the defense's confidence for the rest of the season? Well, that depends on how they handle the success, Joe. I mean, it's a great point in question, but it comes down to where's your mindset. If your mindset is, boy, we feel really good about ourselves and we like how we felt this weekend and we want to do more of that. We want to show that we're the best defense of college football and we're going to just go dominate our next 4 opponents and play at a high level, then you build off the USC game and you really play dominant football. If it's you're feeling good about yourself, look what you did to USC, the rest of the teams we play suck, we've arrived, then you're going to stub your toe and not play as well. So it really comes down to where their mindset is. If you handle it right as a coach and from leaders in the defense, and this is a veteran defense, so I think they're going to handle it correctly. I think this is a springboard for this defense jumping to an even greater level. And it's been very good this season. But I think that it could certainly springboard that and jump them into another category. Raymond Hart with a super chat for your well-earned downtime, Brian. Thanks for all the hard work you do. You're welcome. I appreciate that, Raymond, very, very much. Two-parter from Problems, 99 Problems became one. I know it's early, but who is projecting as a round 1 or 2 prospect from Notre Dame in the 2024 NFL draft? I can't understand why Cam Hart wouldn't. What am I missing? Also, how are guys like Watts, Cross, Maris, Bertrand, Javonte Jean-Baptiste, and Hartman projecting as of today? That's more of a question for Ryan. I just from what I know of how I follow the draft and where those guys stand, all those guys that you just mentioned, Howard Cross, Maris Leofau, J.D. Bertrand, Javonte Jean-Baptiste, and Sam Hartman are all day 3 guys. Howard Cross's issue is size. Maris is probably the one guy that could jump into day 2 just if he tests off the charts, but there's going to be some really good film with him and some really bad film with him. J.D. Bertrand has a lot of really good film, but he's going to be short with short arms and light, and he'll be athletic, but I don't know that it'll be enough to overcome those things. Javonte Jean-Baptiste, great length, great tool, like great frame, but he's a little light in lower body. Don't know that he's an elite athlete and won't have a ton of production. So I don't see him making a jump. And then Sam Hartman just doesn't have elite physical tools and is probably a day 3 guy as well. Ian Book, I think, wasn't he a 4th round pick? He was a day 3 guy as well. So, day 1 is round 1, day 2 is rounds 2 and 3. So they're all day 3 guys. The problem with Cam Hart is simply injuries. I mean, that's what it comes down to. He's had multiple injuries on his shoulder. That's a big red flag if you're an NFL team. And the other one is Cam hasn't shown great ball skills, meaning he doesn't make a lot of interceptions and pass breakups. He just blankets people. And I don't know that his film projects to be that of a 1st-round pick based on that alone. I mean, lack of ball skills and the injuries. I mean, that alone is going to make him out of the 1st round. Or the ball skills alone is going to probably knock him out of the 1st round, the lack of production on the ball. And then the injuries probably knocks him out of day 2 unless he can just, obviously stay healthy the rest of the year. That's a great sign. But I worry about the medicals and how that's going to be on the shoulders. But if that all checks out, I could personally see Cam jumping into day 2 if he tests the way that I think he's going to test, which is, 4.4, high 30s, low 40s vertical, good change of direction numbers. I mean, if his medicals check out, and what that means is, yeah, you had a shoulder injury, that happens. But what they're going to find out is there structural instability in the shoulders that lead to this is going to be a problem for him in his career. That's what they're going to look at. And if he doesn't pass that, then he's going to drop. If he passes that, then you could see him rise up into day 2 if he's able to have a really good combine and pro day period. John O'Connor, why is there a lack of RPOs in Notre Dame's offensive structure? John, I wish I knew. I really do wish You're a running team. It would make sense. You have a quarterback that can do it. He did it a ton in his last school. I honestly cannot fathom. Like last year, I could make okay. Drew Pine's not really an RPO guy. He's a shorter guy, not experienced. You're not great at wide receiver. Um, you know, I just I don't know that I have an answer. Last year I could give you an answer. This year I just don't. I really really don't. Really really don't. 99 problems became one scenario for you. Let's just say Dylan McCullough gets the head coaching job of a group of five school and he takes Joe Rudolph with him as OC, Chancey as wide receiver pass game coordinator. How do you advantageously remake the staff? Well, what I would do is I would go try and hire Tony Alford as my running backs coach. I would try and find the best receiving coach I could and the best O-line coach I could. It's really just it's that simple. I mean, Jared Parker's still your offensive coordinator. If you're able to go get Tony Alford as your running backs coach, that's problem solved. I think Joe Rudolph's done a solid job this year. He's replaceable, and Chancey Stuckey's replaceable. You just got to be willing to spend the money to do it. I mean, you're going to see coaches around the country are going to look at this Notre Dame receiver room, and especially the 23 and the 24 commits, and they're going to look at the quarterbacks Notre Dame has signed and be like, dude, I want to coach that room. It's a far more attractive, and this is where if Chancey Stuckey were to leave after the season, if they make a strong hire to replace him, you've got to give a lot of credit to Chancey Stuckey for making this a far more attractive room. Getting the current freshman class with Jaden Greathouse, Rico Flores, Braylon James, Jordan Faison, and KK Smith, the 24 class with Cam Williams, who's a dude, Micah Gilbert, Logan Saldate. He's done a great job remaking the room. And now it's just about selling it to somebody who you can go hire to replace them. That would be the key. And then just find a really good O-line coach. I don't know who that would be. It'd be some of the similar guys I looked at last year, but I mean that's how you remake it. I mean, you got Gino. It's not overly complicated. You've got your OC still. You've got your quarterbacks coach still. Just find new position coaches to replace those guys. Simple as that. Rob Osgood with a question. Thank you, Rob. What must Notre Dame show in 4 games? Honestly, have the passion and intensity for all those games like USC. Clemson is easy to get up for, but seems like lesser teams are the problems. I don't agree with that, Rob. I don't agree with that. Last year, maybe. But Notre Dame has pretty much dominated every quote-unquote lesser team they've played this year. I don't consider Duke and Louisville lesser teams. I don't think Notre Dame necessarily was not up for Duke. I think Duke was just sky high for that game and played really well. Louisville's a top 25 football team. You played them on the road. Duke's a top 20 football team. They just went on the road, or they just beat NC State by 21 points without their starting quarterback. That's a good football team, and you beat them. I mean, Notre Dame's smashed the teams that are inferior to them so far this year. So I don't know that I would necessarily agree with that, to be honest. I think it's been an issue in the past, Rob. I think you're right. I think it was an issue last year for sure. I don't think it's been as much of an issue this year, to be honest with you. All right. 99 problems became one. If Notre Dame had scheduled a bye for October 7th and instead of playing Louisville on October 21st, do you think they would have been in a better position to win that game and finish the year 11-1? No, I don't think I don't think you can't watch what Notre Dame did a week later and tell me that the lack of a bye is the reason they played the way they did against Louisville. Because if the lack of a bye is why they played the way they did against Louisville, then they should have similarly been as gassed and out of energy and out of focus against USC. So no, I don't. I think the bye is an excuse. That team was not ready to play. The coaches didn't do a good enough job getting them ready to play. The leadership on player level didn't do a good enough job getting them ready to play, and they didn't execute. Simple as that. It happens. I don't like it. It's not okay, but it happens. They bounced back a week later and dominated. So no, I don't think the bye is why Notre Dame is 6-2 right now. I just don't. TJ Kreider, with all the parity this year, I'm super excited about the New Year's Six game. Who are some reasonable matchups, assuming we get right second half of the year? The SEC teams obviously are going to be part of that. A really good team that doesn't win the league, perhaps a Big Ten team, because you got a Big 12 team. I mean, you've got to look at the so like the way that this works. Since this year there's a lot of the at-larges. The odds of you getting an ACC team are slim because you're probably not going to take an ACC team and to play Notre Dame. Maybe you get Notre Dame in the Orange Bowl against a Big Ten or SEC team, assuming that the second Big Ten team is not in the college football playoff. Or, and it would also mean that the ACC's number 2 team falters down the stretch where they don't want to do that. I believe that the Orange Bowl can take no, it's an ACC team versus, excuse me, I said it wrong. It's an ACC team versus a Big Ten SEC team or Notre Dame. I don't think they take Notre Dame in the Orange Bowl. So yes, that is correct there. The other 2 are at-large games. So in years where like the Sugar Bowl is not a playoff game, then that will match the Big 12 and the SEC. So Notre Dame can't play in that game. The Fiesta Bowl and then the Rose Bowl is Big Ten versus the Pac-12. Well, this year, the Rose Bowl and the Sugar Bowl are the playoff games. I'm pretty sure on that. Let me just confirm bowl schedule. I'm pretty sure that that's the case. We looked this up the other day, and I'm pretty sure that's the case. So the semifinal games are the Rose Bowl and the Sugar Bowl. So the bowl tie-ins for those games are gone. So the Fiesta Bowl is 2 at-larges, and the Orange Bowl, as I said, is the ACC versus either SEC, Big Ten, or Notre Dame. And then the Peach Bowl will be 2 at-larges, and then the Cotton Bowl will be 2 at-larges. So there's now going to be 6 at-large berths. One of those is going to have to be taken by a group of 5 team, the best group of 5 team, right? And so there's 5 at-larges. So Notre Dame, it just depends on where they place them because they try to do like geography and all this other kind of stuff. So, the runner-up in the Big 12 or the Big 12 champ, a secondary SEC team, a Bama, a Tennessee, if they win enough games, an LSU could be one. And then possibly a number 2 Big Ten team, possibly, although there's some bowl tie-ins that could take them there. So that would be my best. And then, of course, Notre Dame could end up getting matched up against the group of 5, the best group of 5 team. That's an option as well, depending on which bowl game they go to. So that's where we're at. Arrow 5.20, it's very important to compare starting field position as well. This has not been discussed, but the special teams last year helped the offense a lot more than this year. Yes, it did. You are correct. It did. But I do believe that the defense has done a pretty good job of giving them more short fields this year. So, like, to take the USC game versus Clemson last year. Notre Dame scored 48 points against USC this year. They scored 35 against USC last year. Clemson last year. Against Clemson, you had the blocked punt for a touchdown. You had the pick 6, and then you had the other interception that gave you the ball at the 13-yard line. Well, that's similar to what we saw this year against USC. You had a fumble return for a touchdown. You had an interception where you got the ball at the 2, and then an interception where you got the ball at the 12. The difference is this year's offense was able to put a couple more drives together. So, and then you had an additional short field of like near the 50, but you were able to put a couple big drives together. And so the offense was able to make some big plays in ways that it didn't last year against Clemson. You look at the Syracuse game last year, you had a defensive pick 6, and then you had a blocked punt where you got the ball to 2. That helped. So, yeah, you did, but I don't know that Notre Dame's offense this year has suffered from bad field position all year or not as good field position. Maybe slightly better, but I don't know if it's a ton better because where the special teams has slacked, the defense is picked up by forcing a lot more turnovers. And a lot of the turnovers they forced have either resulted in points, which we've seen, or they've resulted in shorter fields. And so that's helped them. I mean, you look at like the NC State game. They got 2 short fields against NC State that resulted in touchdowns. So that's something that we saw that we didn't see last year. The special teams is doing that. They would block a punt and give them a short field. So this year the defense is giving them more short fields. I'm trying to think through, like, you had the 3 turnovers against NC State. Mentioned 2 of them gave you really short fields. The other one didn't. That was the pick by Benjamin Morrison. You had the 2 turnovers against Duke. One of them gave you the ball at the 13-yard line, and you kicked the field goal. The other one ended the game. You got a short field against Louisville, couldn't do anything with it. And then, of course, what we saw against against USC. So it's probably better. I haven't looked at the numbers, and it's a good observation. But I think the defense where the defense has started, I think the defense has kind of helped them a little bit. And so somebody you can send me those numbers. You can DM me or send me an email where you get those numbers. I don't know who provides starting field position, but I have not got the impression that the offense was just constantly starting in bad positions because of the defense. So I could be wrong, but that's just my impression. Eric Santini, Brian, do you think it's better for teams to play a schedule like Notre Dame where they front load the good opponents or back load a Michigan like Michigan? I don't think either works. I don't think Notre Dame front loaded their opponents this year. I mean, Notre Dame's first 4 games were against Navy, Tennessee State, NC State, and Central Michigan. You had 4 games to kind of get ready for your tough stretch. You had a tough 4-game stretch in the middle of the year, and then you end soft. What I would say is I actually think Notre Dame's schedule this year was set up well. There just were a couple problems. The problem is you didn't anticipate Duke and Louisville being as good as they are. That's really what it boils down to. If Louisville was still coached by Scott Satterfield and Duke was still coached by David Cutcliffe, Notre Dame's 7-1 right now. No problem. So I kind of like it. You know, you broke it up a little bit. I don't think they plan on having that 4-game really brutal stretch. The only thing that I would say, the only thing that I would have done differently this year is, as I said, I would have put the bye week before the USC game. You could have maybe done before Louisville. I'd have been okay with that too, but that's probably where I'd have put it. And either of them would have been fine. I don't know that would have changed anything about the Louisville game, but it would have made for a little bit of a better breakup, like kind of like 50-50 kind of thing. That's what I would have done. But no, I don't think backloading your schedule is great either. We'll see what Michigan can do when the schedule ramps up. That's just one of the worst schedules I've ever seen. I mean, Michigan has no justification for being a playoff team unless they're 13-0. A 12-1 Michigan team has no business being the college football playoff, in my opinion. Their schedule is that soft. It's embarrassing. And same thing for the Big 12 teams. And it's not their fault. I mean, this is just a down year in the conference. I mean, Texas went and played Alabama on the road, and it's not their fault that the Big 12 was down. You know, Oklahoma, you know, their schedule was a little softer out of conference, if we're being honest. They didn't really schedule super tough out of conference because of some of the changes to their schedule. I mean, Arkansas State, SMU, Tulsa, that's weak. You know, and otherwise the schedule would have been better if Cincinnati was typically like they normally are, if UCF was like they normally are, if Oklahoma State's like they normally are, TCU like they normally are. You're going to have 5 ranked opponents, but as it stands right now, because teams are down, you're going to have 1, you know, in the regular season. So it's just sometimes those are the breaks. Michigan purposely scheduled an incredibly ridiculously soft schedule. And they should, if they don't go undefeated, they have no right to be in the playoff, in my opinion. It's a comment from Robert Schmidt. Thank you, Robert. He says, "Hi, Rob from Los Angeles. Just want to let you know I love your show. I personally find IB to be the best overall coverage of Notre Dame football." I appreciate that very, very much. I do. I appreciate that. PK says, "Love to see Sam get 2 options per play, but only if Parker doesn't give it away with personnel. Always 100% agree. Need a heck of a lot more RPO. The offense instantly improves, guaranteed." Very well could be true. Beezer 12 washing beard. Just for fun, what would have to happen for Notre Dame to squeak into the playoffs? Oh my gosh. What would have to happen? Okay. What would have to happen? You would need one of the Big 10 teams to run the table. So you ideally you'd need it to be Ohio State. You need Ohio State to run the table. Because if Ohio State's 11-1 or 12-1 and Notre Dame's 10-2, or if Ohio State's 10-2 and Notre Dame's 10-2, Ohio State will and should get in because the head-to-head and their schedule's tough. So you need Ohio State to run the table, beat Michigan and beat Penn State. You also need one of those 2 teams to lose another game. So you need, for example, let's say Ohio State beats Penn State and Michigan. Both of those 2 teams still play Maryland at Maryland. You need Maryland to upset one of those other teams. So let's say Maryland upsets Penn State and then Penn State beats Michigan or vice versa. So if those two teams have two losses, Notre Dame's rolling, the wins that they'll have better wins. I think they get in over both of those two teams. In the Big 12, what you're going to need is you're going to need Texas to lose again to Oklahoma. And then probably for Texas, well, I think Texas losing twice. They go 11-1 regular season. They finish 11-2. They'd have one better win than Notre Dame, or one more win than Notre Dame. But their schedule would be their entire resume would be built on beating Alabama. They'd be 1-2 in big games. I don't see that happening. So I think they would get in over Texas. Pac-12, you need them to. This is the most likely, actually. The Pac-12 is the most likely. Is the Pac-12 just eats itself? They just all beat each other. What you also need in the Pac-12 is you need USC to do some damage. So you need USC, to beat one of Washington or Oregon. You need, if not both. If USC beats both of them, that'd be big for Notre Dame, because I think Notre Dame would have a shot. And then let's say they beat them both in the regular season, and then USC loses to a two-loss team in the Pac-12 title game. You need chaos. You need USC to lose one more game, but also beat some of those teams. You need Washington to lose to USC and then either lose to Oregon State or Utah or Washington State, which is possible. You need USC to beat Oregon and then Oregon to lose. Well, if USC beats Oregon, they're out. So as far as relative to Notre Dame, if USC beats Washington and then say they lose to Oregon, USC beats Washington and Oregon and say loses to Utah or UCLA, they're out. Or here's the other one: USC beats Washington and Oregon in the regular season. Oregon is then out. And then Washington loses to, let's say, Oregon State on the road, and then beats USC in the rematch. The Pac-12 would fall behind Notre Dame, in my opinion. So I think you're going to get an ACC team in. So if Florida State loses, they're going to lose once, and they're going to get in. So I think Florida State or North Carolina, one of those two will get in. I'm banking on Florida State. A Big Ten team's going to get in. An SEC team is going to get in. So, and then you'd need like Oklahoma to lose again to somebody else. To a couple teams. It's just going to be hard because Georgia's not going to lose two games, in my opinion. That'll be tough. You're gonna here's what you need. I think Florida State gets in. Somebody said Florida State goes down this weekend. I'd be great. I'd love that. You'd need Florida State to then lose another game. You'd need North Carolina to then drop a couple. So, because it's going to be hard to not have an SEC team. Because I just don't see Georgia losing the game in the regular season. If they lose a game in the regular season and then beat Bama or beat LSU or whoever they get in the SEC title game, they're in. It's going to be almost impossible to not have a Big Ten team in just because how soft their schedules are. I just don't see Oklahoma losing two games, and Notre Dame shouldn't be in over a one-loss Oklahoma team, even with how bad their schedule is. Then if the other option is Texas runs the table and then they beat Oklahoma, it's going to be hard to not have a Big 12 team in unless they get upset by somebody. So Pac-12 carnage, Big 10 carnage, ACC upsets is the best option. There's so many things that have to happen. That's why I'm just really not concerned about where they are right now when it comes to the playoff. I'm just want to get a New Year's Six bowl, and then I'll be happy. Andre Thompson with the question. Thank you, Andre. Do you think the offense would throw down the field on the first couple of series just to soften out the defense for some run plays later? Yes. But only if it's there and makes sense. Like, I'm not a believer in just throwing deep just to throw deep unless you've got like Rocket, which Lou Holtz did. But my personal preference, I always try to design some early shots. Always. If I'm going to have a 10 to 15 play script, I'm always going to have at least two shots designed, or at least two options for shots designed. I'm a big believer in that. But it's also not just about softening up the defense. I want to get a big play for the sake of being a big play. A byproduct of that is to soften up the defense. But I want to get a big play. I want to take your soul early. And I'm a big believer in that. So, yeah, I think they should. Absolutely, Andre. And I think if you hit them, you all of a sudden get that defense on their heels, and it has a big impact. There's no doubt about that. Then last one from Brandon Plesner. We have a super chat. Thank you, Brandon. I really appreciate that. We're going to end the show with this one. Brandon says, with all the cornerback talent that Notre Dame is in on 25, who's your ideal three-man class? I can't pick just three right now between Golden, Thomas, Zachary, and Williams. So for me, Golden and Thomas are no-brainers. No-brainers. Williams and Zachary are very similar players. I'd be thrilled with either one. If I could only pick one, I'd go with Devin Williams. I know he's a little smaller than Mark Zachary. I think Dallas Golden is a dude. Notre Dame did a great job with him. Great job with him on his visit this weekend, from what I'm told. So they're a player there. Cree Thomas, to me, I love Cree Thomas. He gives you that big boundary cornerback type of guy, or a real rangy field guy, if that's what you think is best at. And then if you get those two, and then Zachary and Williams, I mean, it's a win-win. I'm picking Williams just because I think he's slightly better. But if it's Zachary, I'm thrilled. I mean, thrilled. So that'd be a heck of a cornerback class. But yeah, Dallas Golden is my number one guy. Cree Thomas is there as well. That's a great. I mean, honestly, Brandon, there's no loss in that. Like, my ideal class, honestly, I'm gonna cheat here, Brandon. I'm sorry, dude. I'm gonna cheat. My ideal class is three of those dudes. I don't care which one. Just give me three of those guys. But if you say take any of those four, give me three. If I can only have one guy, Dallas Golden be the one guy where I'd definitely say, definitely, if I could guarantee one, he'd be the one I guarantee. And then give me two of the other three. But I love that four-man group. I really do. So that's going to do it for today's show, everybody. Thank you all so much for being with me today. And I'm gonna miss y'all actually a little bit over the next 4 days. So as I said before, no show this weekend for me. We'll have IB Nation Sports Talk tonight and next week. So, and Andre, thank you for asking about my mom. She's doing a lot better. She's going to be in town next weekend for the Pitt game. So we're going to have a tailgate next week, which will be a lot of fun, barring anything coming up with my family between now and then. So we'll have that next week. And I'm going to take the next few days off, rest my body, my throat, get some health stuff figured out, get caught up on a lot of other things because I need a break. So it's my first actual true break since I started Irish Breakdown in 2019. So I hope that you all understand that I definitely do need to take some time and are patient with me as I before I get back on Monday. And still, please be on the boards. Please check out our content. We'll still have stuff. IB's not going away. I'm just taking a few days off. So I appreciate your patience with that. And then I'll be back on Monday and be ready to rock and roll. And me and Vince and I are going to do a mailbag on Monday, and we'll get ready for Pitt. So enjoy college football this weekend. I will still be on the boards because that's kind of fun and a relief. So I'll be there. If you have questions for me, hit me up on there. If you want to talk ball, you can always hit me up on there. I'll still be on there. But other than that, I'm going to take some time off. So thank you all so much. I appreciate y'all very much. And we'll talk to you guys here very soon on the Irish Breakdown podcast.